Chapter 869. The disciples with lower cultivation levels gathered together, waiting for the news with anxiety and anticipation. The other elders in the nascent divinity realm of the reincarnation sect also gathered together. Although Shi Tianfang led the elites of the reincarnation sect, he was still a heavenly realm cultivator. Other than Shi Tianfang and 6 paths of reincarnation, the others stayed behind. On the one hand, they were worried that things would go awry, and on the other hand, they wanted to keep an eye on Mo Shuluo, the Shura Path sect master. Elder Tian Wu's expression was calm, and his eyes were calm. However, he was constantly communicating with his divine sense. If we don't kill the snake, we'll be bitten by it. If we can destroy Xianmen Tianzong and kill the master of the celestial gate, that would be the best outcome. It will be difficult. After the battle in West Hill City, Taishu Temple has changed their overall strategy. They no longer care about protecting our nascent divinity realm cultivators. Their top priority is to restore the power of the divine land. However, the master of the celestial gate is already strong enough. Although Taishu Temple is against him, they won't kill him. If the other families join forces to kill him, I'm afraid that Taishu Temple will intervene. Weakening Xianmen Tianzong so that he can't be as aggressive as before is what Taishu Temple is happy to see. If the treasures of the Celestial Gate of Wonders fall into the hands of our few powers, it will damage the Celestial Sect of Wonders and strengthen us. As long as the Master of the Celestial Gate of Wonders and his disciples who are also gradually growing up do not fall, the overall strength of the Divine Continent will not weaken. This should also be the bottom line of the Void Temple. Humph, Lin Feng has it easy. Even if we don't surround and kill him, he won't be able to do anything when he returns. If he dares to take revenge, then the Zhu clan will join forces to teach him a lesson and make him lose some face. If he really is stubborn, then we can only, it's been tens of thousands of years. The reincarnation sect is finally going to rise again. The glory of the past will return to the reincarnation sect and the heavenly Tao. The Davidao elders all had smiles on their faces. Majestic auras soared into the sky. Although there was no sound, their auras stirred the space outside the mountain, causing joyous laughter to echo through the world. However, at this moment, the sky above the reincarnation sect's path of heaven suddenly cracked. From the void, a foot landed on the ground. It was a gigantic foot that was completely formed from a hazy purple aura. There were countless rays of light surging within it, but they couldn't see them clearly. With this stomp, the entire sky collapsed, and the void was completely destroyed. Everything beneath his feet seemed to have returned to the primordial stage before the world was created. And this giant foot was stepping on the mountain gate of the reincarnation sect's path of heaven. The laughter of the people of Heaven Dao stopped abruptly and instantly turned into screams of terror. Formations that were even more powerful than Eastern Heavenly Gate's Great Mountain Guarding Formation were activated. 6 gigantic formations formed a gigantic formation that resembled a roulette. It appeared in the sky above Heaven's Path's mountain gate, covering the sky and covering the sun. The 6 formations represented the 6 paths of reincarnation. They merged together to form the 6 paths of reincarnation formation, which evolved into the cycle of life and death of the 6 paths of reincarnation. Although there were no Tao integration stage cultivators controlling it, with a return to void stage elder of the heavenly Tao controlling it and the other elders assisting it, the formation still displayed astonishing defensive power. Unfortunately, all of this was in vain. The foot in the sky stomped down. Boundless light flashed within the purple aura, and the 6 paths of reincarnation instantly collapsed. The 6 paths of reincarnation were shattered, and reincarnation was no more. The gigantic formation was directly destroyed. Immediately afterward, the giant foot continued to stomp down, directly crushing the spirit mountain where the reincarnation sect's path of heaven resided. It was as if a giant had stomped down an ant's nest. Some of the reincarnation sect's younger disciples who were unaware of what was happening suddenly felt their vision blur. They discovered that they had already left the mountain gate and were now in a faraway wilderness. They looked at each other in confusion. Looking into the distance, they saw a shocking scene unfold in front of them. They were born and raised in the blessed land. The towering spirit mountain, at this moment, had been completely flattened. It was as if someone had directly erased it from the earth, and it had disappeared without a trace. At this moment, they discovered that the people who had been ridiculing and cursing them had all disappeared. Their primordial soul realm elders were also nowhere to be seen. Looking at this scene, which seemed like doomsday, all the disciples of the reincarnation sect were in a trance. They could only stare blankly at this scene, unable to say a word for a long time. At the southern foot of the great Hunduan mountain in the southern wilderness, in the void above the mountain gate of the wilderness sword sect, there were two beams of sword light intertwining. One beam of sword light was colorful and desolate, while the other beam of sword light was like a raging fire, burning half of the void. A voice came from the fire-like sword light, "De Huang, are you really going to walk on this path until the end? Xianmen Tianzong can't even protect himself this time. After the destruction of the Xian sect, your wilderness sword sect will be buried together with him." Before Sword Venerable of the Great Wilderness had time to reply, the void where the two were fighting suddenly shook slightly. The two beams of sword light slowed down. Just now, it felt as if a person's foot had landed on the ground. However, such a big movement was too exaggerated. The next moment, a giant hand made of purple gas stretched out from the void. It opened its 5 fingers and directly grabbed Sword Venerable Raging Fire, who had turned into a sea of fire. In front of this giant hand, the vast and boundless sea of fire was like an illusion. With a wave of the hand, the fire dissipated and the scorching temperature in the void instantly cooled down. Sword Venerable of the Great Wilderness revealed his figure and looked at this scene in shock. Only an indifferent voice sounded from the bottom of his heart, "Taoism friend, you have worked hard. Later, you can come to my Yujing mountain for a visit." The voice instantly faded away. The void shook, as if an indomitable giant was walking in the void. This giant instantly arrived at the mountain gate of the Breaking Thunder Sword sect. There, thunders and continuous explosions could be heard as it fought with the boundless sea hanging in the sky. "Thunder, it's wise for you to wait and see. Now, you're asking for trouble. Believe me, it won't take long." As Sword Venerable of the Vast Sea spoke, the void beside him suddenly opened up. Sword Venerable of the Vast Sea was stunned. He saw a giant hand made of purple gas stretch out from the void and grab him. At the same time, the dark void that opened up was like a huge mouth that suddenly produced a majestic suction force. In an instant, it swallowed the boundless blue sea that covered the mountain gate of the Breaking Thunder Sword sect. Sword Venerable of the Vast Sea wanted to resist. His entire body turned into waves of light, but he was immediately pressed back into his human form by the giant hand made of purple gas. In the next moment, the giant hand made of purple gas grabbed Sword Venerable of the Vast Sea and put it back into the void, disappearing without a trace. Seeing this scene, Sword Venerable of the Thunder Sword sect was dumbfounded. In a short moment, he saw the blue sky again. Sword Venerable of the Vast Sea and the boundless sea had all disappeared. He was the only one standing between heaven and earth. "My friend, you've worked hard. You can come to my Yujing mountain later." A vast voice sounded in his heart and instantly went far away. On the way from the Purple Cloud Peak of the Thunder Mountain Range to Kunlun Mountain where the mountain gate of the Purple Cloud Path was located, endless Dharma power kept vibrating in the void and thunder roared. Layers of arrays were spread out, constantly blocking the surging thunderbolts. At the same time, violent giant beasts were wreaking havoc in the arrays, fighting with the thunderbolts. It was the Reincarnation Sect Master of the Hell Path, Dark Lord, and the Beast Sect Master, Wushusen. They were here to stop the Purple Cloud Path Sect Master, Dao Master Thundercloud, and his junior brother, Dao Master Blue Thunder. The vast Ninth Heaven thunderbolts smashed the demonic beasts into charcoal one after another and tore apart one mysterious array after another. However, Dark Lord and Wushusen had endless means to stop Dao Master Thundercloud and Dao Master Blue Thunder. Wushusen said with a smile, "Why do you two have to work so hard? Although the Purple Cloud Path and Xianmen Tianzong are good friends and allies, you're not a branch or subordinate. It's meaningless to fight to the death with us. What's more, even if you rush over, it's useless. Mount Shu, the East Heaven Gate, and the Reincarnation sect have joined forces to destroy the Xian sect. Without the Xian sect master, how long can Xianmen Tianzong last? The destruction of the Xian sect is destined, just like the destruction of the Buddhist sect. I think they should have succeeded by now. Wu Shusen suddenly stopped talking because he suddenly felt an invisible giant walking forward in the void. It was clearly very far away, but with one step, it had reached the battlefield. Two giant hands formed from purple energy reached out from the void and grabbed Wu Shusen and the Dark Lord, one on the left and one on the right. Wu Shusen's expression changed greatly. With a thought, several powerful demonic beasts appeared beside him to protect him. Among them, there were two demonic beasts whose strength was comparable to the primordial true spirit realm. However, when the giant hands grabbed, the numerous demonic beasts instantly turned into a mist of blood. The bodies of the two strongest demonic beasts were also twisted, dripping with blood and flesh, and they were no longer breathing. With a grasp of its 5 fingers, it had already sucked Wu Shusen along with the flesh and blood. On the other side, the Dark Lord's body lit up with layers of light. One powerful spirit design after another appeared on his body. His black robe also flickered with light and was covered with all kinds of runes. Impressively, it was a transformation-grade Dharma treasure. These thousands of spirit designs seemed to be only the size of a palm, but in fact, they had shrunk the space, which was why they were gathered in front of the Dark Lord. These spirit designs were formed by the gathering of billions of talismans. When they were spread out, each of them covered the sky and the earth, vast and boundless. Every spirit design had its own magical use. Some reflected, some devoured, some imprisoned, some purely defensive, some trap-like offense and defense, and some obstructed and wore them down. Among them, there were hundreds of spirit designs that turned into huge doors. When the doors opened, on the other side of each door was a foreign space that looked like hell. Black sand hell, ice hell, raging fire hell, hurricane hell, lava hell, all kinds of terrifying calamities and tribulations descended and surrounded the Dark Lord. Seeing this, Tao Master Thundercloud and Tao Master Blue Thunder frowned. However, the giant hand didn't seem to be hindered at all. It turned a blind eye to the thousands of spirit designs in front of it. As its fingers opened and closed, the thousands of spirit designs were all broken. Then, before the Dark Lord could do anything, it grabbed him. Tao Master Thundercloud and Tao Master Blue Thunder looked at the scene in front of them in shock. Suddenly, they heard an indifferent voice in their ears, "You two have worked hard. Later, you can come to my Yujing Mountain." As the voice lingered in the air, it was already far away. The two purple spirit hands grabbed Wu Shusen and the Dark Lord and took them back into the void. Chapter 870. Looking at the purple hand disappearing in the void, Tao Master Thundercloud and Tao Master Blue Thunder looked at each other and said in unison, "The master of the celestial sect has returned to the vast thousand world." The two big shots of the purple cloud Tao looked at each other and suddenly sighed together. However, after sighing, Tao Master Blue Thunder laughed. "This time, someone is going to be unlucky." Tao Master Thundercloud nodded. "This time, there will be a great calamity, but it is not the calamity of Xianmen Tianzong." Within the grasslands of the northern wilderness, Sword Premier Junior Shang and Sword Premier Savagely, who were in the midst of fighting the Longevity Heavenly Spear and the Northern Militant High Priest, saw the two gigantic hands made from purplish energy piercing through the sky towards them. Immediately, a feeling of impending disaster rose up within their hearts. Feeling the vast and powerful fluctuation of magic power, Sword Master Little Shang and Sword Master Li Meng's hearts sank. The master of the celestial sect has returned so soon? Without hesitation, the two great sword cultivators manifested their void return Dharma bodies at the same time. Their primordial spirits merged with the lesser Shang and Li Xiong swords, transforming into two streaks of sword light that could cleave the heavens and split the earth. Like a river of stars, they attempted to break through the gigantic hand of purple chi and escape into the distance. One sword strike was ferocious, forceful, and domineering. The other sword strike was even more ruthless, swift, and bone-piercingly cold. Two majestic swordlights directly split the void, leaving behind two sharp scars. However, the two purple hands gently patted and immediately slapped the two sword lights down. With a clench of his hand, he had already caught the two sword lights in his palm. The incomparably sharp and ferocious sword lights were like two wooden sticks that had lost their edge when they landed in his hand. They were firmly held in his hand. The black-robed young man manifested from the longevity heavenly spear magic treasure stared at this scene dumbfounded. Beside him, the old northern militant high priest also widened his eyes. An indifferent voice echoed between heaven and earth, "You two have worked hard. I appreciate your kindness. You two can come to my Yujing mountain later." The voice gradually dissipated and the purple hands that grabbed Sword Master Little Shang and Sword Master Li Meng also disappeared into the void. On the border of the Great Zhou Dynasty and the Great Qin Dynasty, the Immortal Dragon City, the Grand Imperial Palace, and the Great Celestial Wheel were confronting each other. At this moment, the Immortal Dragon City, apart from the original eternal and powerful intent of protecting the people, had also fused with some other changes, causing the originally thick and sturdy city walls to have many changes and sharpness that had never been seen before. The seemingly endless city walls stretched for millions of miles in the void, like a mighty river of time, unshakable, indestructible, and unstoppable. This was the result of Immortal Dragon City successfully advancing to the next level after obtaining Instant of Brilliance from Lin Feng. Currently, not only was Immortal Dragon City's defense still astonishing, but the offensive power that seemed ordinary compared to its defense had also greatly improved. Stone Feather, Liang Pan, and Pan. Liang Zhu and Zhu Hongwu Emperor were calmly looking at each other. Little King and Liang Pan were Lin Feng. Lin Dragon City, and Emperor Immortal Lin Dragon City, and Dragon. Stone Feather, Liang Pan, and Zhu Hongwu Emperor looked at each other calmly. None of them spoke. They were waiting for the final result of the Yujing Mountain battle so that they could make their next decision. Right at this moment, the Immortal Dragon City, the Grand Imperial Palace, and the Great Celestial Wheel shook at the same time. Stone Feather and the other two who were spiritually connected to these three great treasures of creation also sensed it and looked up. They saw the sky split open, and 2 feet formed by purple gas descended. It was as if they were walking between heaven and earth. However, the position of his feet was 1 foot at a time, trampling toward the Grand Imperial Palace and the Great Celestial Wheel. The 2 great treasures of creation flickered. They didn't dodge and wanted to shatter the 2 feet. However, inside the feet formed by purple gas, boundless light flashed, as if small worlds were spreading out. At the same time, black and white divine light also flickered under the feet. Boundless light mist and runes drifted out, shaking heaven and earth. Boundless power collided between heaven and earth, causing the entire Great Thousand World to shake. The Grand Imperial Palace and the Great Celestial Wheel were unharmed, but the 2 feet formed by purple gas didn't shatter either. It was as if they had stepped on 2 stones, and then they stepped over them. They continued forward, walking between heaven and earth, and instantly disappeared into the void. Even Emperor Liang Pan of Zhou, who had always been shrewd, changed his expression at this moment. He was an emperor who had the heart to look at the world, but at this moment, someone actually stepped over his head. Such humiliation was unprecedented. Zhu Hongwu was expressionless, but his drooping eyelids suddenly opened, and a cold light flickered in his eyes. That collision just now had happened suddenly, and they had also underestimated their enemy. The 2 great treasures of creation didn't use their full power, and they thought that it was enough to make the other party suffer. Who would have thought that the other party's magic power was even higher than they had expected? As a result, they had been humiliated for nothing. At this moment, they had the intention to get back at him, but they felt the giant walking in the void stop. And the Immortal Dragon City in front of them suddenly shook, resonating with the invisible giant. A voice resounded between heaven and earth, "The matter between our 2 clans can be discussed slowly in the future." The anger on Liang Pan's face disappeared in a flash, and he had already regained his calmness. He took a deep look at the Immortal Dragon City and the seemingly empty void. He didn't say anything, and he didn't leave either. However, the restless Grand Imperial Palace had already gradually calmed down. Zhu Hongwu took a look at the Grand Imperial Palace, and his eyelids slightly drooped again. The shocking footsteps were still echoing between heaven and earth, and they gradually went further away. The immortal Dragon City, the Grand Imperial Palace, and the Great Celestial will continue to face each other, and everything returned to calmness, as if nothing had happened. However, the overbearing pressure from the two great treasures of creation had already dissipated. Emperor Qin stood on the immortal Dragon City, and a voice gradually calmed down in his ears. "Thank you, Dao friend. I will definitely repay this favor. After this matter is over, why don't Dao friend come to my Jade Capital Mountain to have a seat?" Stone Feather's face was as calm as water, and his eyes were like a deep lake, without any ripples. However, the previous arrogance of the immortal Dragon City seemed to have gradually calmed down. Zhu Hongwu's fingers slightly curled up, and then relaxed. "Reporting to your majesty, the East Heavenly Gate is finished." After trying, not only could he not contact Xiao Dongtian, Dao Master Dong Ming, and the others, he even lost contact with the East Heavenly Gate Grotto Heaven on the southeast coast. In the Grand Imperial Palace, Liang Pan's expression was calm, and he didn't speak. At this moment, on Jade Capital Mountain, Jia Luosher used the sect-returning scabbard to keep the heaven-crushing sword, and was about to fly away. Su Anda abandoned the light ball in the Yin-Yang Sea, and tried to take back the Book of Life and Death, leaving Xiao Dongtian in the East Heavenly Gate to bitterly resist Xianmen Tianzong's Permitha Bridge. The other cultivators who attacked Jade Capital Mountain suffered setbacks, and they lost some of their spirit. The reincarnation sect's hungry ghost Taoists' gaze shifted back and forth between Jade Capital Mountain, Su Anda, and Zhang Enrui. His expression was wooden, but his heart was in turmoil, and he faintly wanted to retreat. However, when he tried to contact the reincarnation sect, he found that he couldn't get through, as if some power had blocked him. This discovery frightened the Taoist. Then, he saw the child who was fighting with Su Anda for the Book of Life and Death in the chaotic hole. Silently, he said, "Anda, there are still many things you don't understand." His control over the Book of Life and Death was getting stronger. Su Anda's magic power had only wrapped around it for a short while before it was shaken off. The Book of Life and Death suddenly turned into a black light, and was absorbed into the chaotic hole. However, the three life and death nether Dao fruits seemed to be blocked by an invisible barrier, and they couldn't leave. In the void, a faint layer of light appeared, like a sphere enveloping Jade Capital Mountain, isolating it from the outside world. It was like an independent creation of heaven and earth. Other than the creation magic treasure, the Book of Life and Death, everything that wanted to leave Jade Capital Mountain was restricted inside. The expressions of Jia Luosher, Su Anda, and Xiao Dongtian all changed. They looked at the scene in front of them with bitter expressions. The thing they were most worried about had finally happened. Noticing the changes in Jade Capital Mountain, Xiao Yan, Zhu Yi, and the others were also slightly stunned. Then, they were overjoyed. Master has come out of seclusion. At that moment, the huge mysterious heaven treasure tree at the top of Jade Capital Mountain suddenly shook violently. From the leaves to the trunk, everything was shaking. The surface of the entire towering tree suddenly surged with a bright light that spread through the void, causing the entire Yujing Mountain to seem to be enveloped in a sea of light. Every ray of light was bright and sparkling, as if it was a physical crystal. Within the light, there were layers of space barriers that were continuously stacked together. This unprecedented scene not only made Su Anda and the others uneasy, but also shocked Xianmen Tianzong and the others. In the void, there seemed to be countless huge consciousnesses descending from the sky, landing on the mysterious heaven treasure tree. It was as if the mysterious heaven treasure tree had extended countless branches into the heavens and the realms. At this moment, these branches had all retracted. An extremely majestic spiritual consciousness flowed out from this towering tree, shaking the heavens and the people. The light on the Permitha Bridge became even more dazzling. The majestic creation consciousness appeared and resonated with the mysterious heaven treasure tree. In the mysterious heaven time cave, under the small mysterious heaven treasure tree, the old man, who had remained unmoved even when Zhu Yi had refined the Permitha bridge and only cared about playing chess with himself, finally reacted. He raised his head and looked outside the cave with a blank expression. At the top of Jade Capital Mountain, the emotions of the mysterious heaven treasure tree's majestic consciousness became more and more obvious. It was as if the heavens and realms were shaking together, solemnly welcoming someone's return. Rolling purple gas appeared, covering the sky and dyeing the entire sky purple. The purple gas dispersed, and 49 tiny specks of dust scattered in the sky. The light in the dust grew brighter and brighter, as if a small world had connected into one. It transformed into a radiant staircase that descended from the sky. The 4 symbols of earth, water, fire, and wind broke through the chaos, and the 8 trigrams re-established the universe. Together, they prostrated themselves at the foot of this radiant staircase. Slowly, a figure was walking down from the top of the staircase. He was dressed in a long purple robe, and his hair was unbound. There was a Tai Chi pattern on his forehead that seemed to contain the infinite great Tao of heaven and earth. Chapter 871. Seeing the figure on the radiant stairs, the 4 Tai Chi diagrams above the Permitha bridge turned back into human form. Xiao Yan, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and Shi Tianhao all knelt on the bridge. "Welcome back, Master." Yu Hongyan knelt in the void. "Welcome back, Master." Yang Qing knelt in the All-Heavens Hall. "Welcome back, Master." Li Yuanfang stood up from the mysterious heaven treasure tree's branch. Slowly, he knelt. "Welcome back, Master." Luo Qinggu stepped on the Yin-Yang Sea and knelt on the surface of the sea. "Welcome back, Master." The other people of Xianmen Tianzong, Kang Nanhua, Zen Master Dade, Feng Liangji, and the others also bowed. "Welcome back, Sect Leader." Xiao Zhen, Gu Peng, and Sword Venerable Lu Guang also bowed. "Welcome back, Sect Leader." On the radiant stairs, Lin Feng looked around and smiled. "I'm glad that all of you have achieved something." As he spoke, he suddenly waved his hand. A long river of light appeared and wrapped around the 3 life and death nether Dao fruits that wanted to fly away. At the same time, it also sucked in the void where the child who took the book of life and death was. Next, his gaze swept past Su Anda, Jia Luosher, and the others. Finally, his gaze landed on the sect-returning scabbard that was still shaking in Jia Luosher's hand. He smiled and shook his head. Jia Luosher felt a chill in his heart. Heavenly immortal sword chi surged around him, and he was about to manifest his heavenly 9 transformations Dao fruit. But before he could manifest his Dao fruit, the void in front of him changed. In a flash, Lin Feng was already in front of him. He reached out and held the hilt of the heaven punishment sword sealed in the sect-returning scabbard. Lin Feng flicked his wrist, and suddenly, an infinite amount of blood-red sword light came out of the sect-returning scabbard. Sharp cracks appeared on the surface of the scabbard, and the fierce red light kept flashing in the cracks. Jia Luosher let out a shrill cry, and the 9 cycles of immortal heaven Dao fruit spun in the air. A resplendent beam of light shot out. It was not a straight beam of light. Instead, it twisted strangely in the air and spiraled toward Lin Feng. Lin Feng's expression was indifferent as he casually pointed his index and middle fingers out like a sword. A gray light shone on his fingertip, containing a terrifying power that could destroy the heavens and earth. This was the heaven-punishing sword chi. The spiraling sword light emitted by the rockfall immortal heaven's 9 transformations Dao fruit was strange and unpredictable, but Lin Feng used his finger as a sword. With a casual point of his sword, the spiraling sword light seemed to come specifically for Lin Feng's fingertip. The tip of the sword light accurately collided with Lin Feng's fingertip. Jia Luosher's expression changed slightly. This was not his original intention, but Lin Feng's seemingly casual wave of the sword had sealed all the variations of his sword light. The spiraling sword light and Lin Feng collided. The seemingly terrifying bright sword light was directly annihilated by the gray light on Lin Feng's fingertip. No aura dissipated, and no light shattered. It was directly annihilated, no longer existing. Lin Feng's sword did not stop there. The bright sword light that had been spiraling in the air was annihilated without a trace. Then, Lin Feng's fingertip pierced through the void and touched Jia Luosher's 9 cycles of immortal heaven Dao fruit. Without the slightest delay, the sword Dao true fruit formed by 81 coiling dragons shattered in an instant. Lin Feng's fingertip continued forward, aiming straight for Jia Luosher's forehead. The boundless universe suddenly shook violently. In the void that was isolated by the light barrier of Mount Yujing, an extremely terrifying radiance suddenly appeared. Tens of thousands of sword chi spiraled and merged, forming a powerful sword aura. Such a majestic sword aura was formed by thousands upon thousands of sword auras gathered together to form a dazzling sword light. Tens of thousands of brilliant sword lights crisscrossed, forming a terrifying sword formation that shook the heavens and the earth. These tens of thousands of sword formations gathered and stacked together with mysterious principles, forming a dazzling star. A star that was even larger and more dazzling than all the real stars in the Milky Way universe. It was a sword star that was filled with an unparalleled aura. This sword star had a long tail of flames. It split the sky and the earth as it charged towards the light barrier of Mount Yujing. Seeing this, Jia Luosher's face lit up with joy. Uncle Master Big Dipper. Even Su Anda, Xiao Dong Tian, Zhang Enrui, Dao Master Dongming, Immortal Sky Ghost, and the others felt their spirits lift when they heard this. Big Dipper Sword Venerable, the Grand Elder of the Shushan Sword Sect, the Uncle Master of Exayan Longsheng and Jia Luosher, was a great sword cultivator of Shushan who had attained Dao in the Middle Epoch. He wielded the ancient sword Big Dipper, one of the 2 strongest swords below the Immortal Heaven Sword. He had completely passed the first tribulation and entered the Dharma ending realm. Exayan Longsheng wielded the Immortal Heaven Sword. His situation was special. If one only considered his own cultivation level, this elder would be the #1 sword cultivator in the Divine Land. The celestial Dipper sword star that could destroy heaven and earth smashed heavily into the light barrier surrounding Mount Yujing, directly piercing through it. Lin Feng's expression did not change at all. He did not even look at Big Dipper Sword Venerable. Within the mysterious sky treasure tree, a majestic will suddenly moved. Even Mount Yujing and the cyclic purple chi shook. Like a crystal rampart, a sea of light surged and covered the entire Mount Yujing, turning it transparent almost instantly. The dazzling Big Dipper sword star suddenly pierced through the illusory Mount Yujing. Big Dipper Sword Venerable followed his heart's will. When his sword missed, he immediately stopped, revealing the appearance of a tall, middle-aged man. His eyebrows reached his temples, and he was very handsome. He looked back at Mount Yujing, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. His swordsmanship could truly split the heavens and the earth. It could even destroy space and time. It was not something that could be avoided by hiding in the void. Under his sword will directly locked onto his opponent. No matter where he hid, he could not escape. If he escaped into the void, even the void would be destroyed. But just now, Mount Yujing had actually avoided his sword light. This surprised even Big Dipper Sword Venerable. Su Anda, Xiao Dong Tian, and the others felt a chill in their hearts. Even if it's a Dharma treasure of creation, an expert in the Dharma ending realm can use his own mystiques to attack or defend against Big Dipper Sword Venerable. But how can he avoid this sword with just the art of teleportation? This is the way of spatial change to the extreme. Even if the void Yin Yang Bell in the Taishu Temple achieved creation, it would at most be like this, right? Even if the void Yin Yang Bell achieved creation, it might not be able to do this. Jia Luosher's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he watched. Lin Feng ignored Big Dipper Sword Venerable and still pointed his finger at him. If it were before today, I wouldn't be able to take this sword of yours. But today, it's different. Jia Luosher took a deep breath. His hand was still tightly holding onto the sect-returning scabbard that was about to crack. His other hand, like a sword, stabbed at Lin Feng. White smoke surged from his fingertips. The vast and ethereal heavenly sword chi was activated, and the sword will that seemed to be able to split the heavens and the earth surged. In the white heavenly sword chi, there was a black aura that kept entangling and spreading, revealing a terrifying aura that could destroy the heavens and the earth. Splitting the heavens and the earth, and the destruction of the heavens and the earth together shaped the entire process of creation, from creation to destruction, and exploded with shocking power. Jia Luosher's voice was hoarse and old, like iron and stone rubbing against each other. From the first time I studied your sword will, I thought that the heavenly sword and the heavenly punishment, separated into two extremes, and then combined into one, would truly reach the extreme of the heavenly sword way. Just now, when I fought with your heavenly punishment sword, and then used the sect returning scabbard to contain it, I can already take this step. Although it's only the first step, although it's only a prototype, I can already see the extreme of the sword way, and see the brand new path ahead of my Shushan sword way. As Jia Luosher roared, he used his finger as a sword and stabbed out, meeting Lin Feng's sword finger. Both sides were facing each other head-on. My sword way. My. Jia Luosher's roar came to an abrupt stop. That ear-piercing voice seemed to have been cut in half by a sword. He was dumbfounded as he watched his terrifying sword will, which was a mixture of black and white, be cut apart by Lin Feng's sword. Between heaven and earth, Lin Feng's indifferent voice evaluated, your path is nothing more than a blind path. Buying the casket and returning the pearls, how foolish. Jia Luosher shouted in shock, impossible. Before he finished speaking, Lin Feng had already pierced his throat with his finger as a sword. A hole appeared in his throat, and faint light and sword will continued to dissipate. Jia Luosher's human body was formed from his primordial spirit, and any wounds could be healed at any time. However, the wound that Lin Feng had left could not be healed, no matter how hard Jia Luosher tried. He could only watch as the essence of his Dao technique dissipated from the wound. He opened his mouth, and could only let out gasps of air. It was as if his body was real flesh, and someone had pierced his throat, so he could not speak. Jia Luosher's soul consciousness sent out a hysterical roar. Besides his neck, his entire body twisted violently, turning into beams of sword light and sword chi, crossing the sky. However, his neck didn't change at all. The sword wound on his neck didn't change at all. My thinking is correct, it can't be wrong, it can't be wrong. Jia Luosher could not make a sound. His consciousness was scattered in the void, constantly vibrating and disturbing the spiritual chi of the world. However, it could not hide the signs of decline. He was at the end of the road, like a dying man struggling. Lin Feng ignored him. He held the hilt of the Sky Destroyer sword in one hand, and the sect returning scabbard in the other. The Sky Destroyer sword had already slid out. It landed in Lin Feng's hand, and endless blood-red sword light surged, becoming even more violent and vicious. The sect-returning scabbard gave off waves of mournful cries. The surface of the scabbard was covered in cracks, and it looked extremely miserable. At this moment, the blade of the Sky Destroyer sword was clearly sharpened, and only the last bit of rust was left. The fierce and domineering sword will even cause the mysterious Sky Treasure Tree and the Permetha Golden Bridge to slightly resonate. With a thought from Lin Feng, the huge sword case rushed out of the mysterious Sky Time Cave. Lin Feng swung his hand, and the Sky Destroyer sword returned to the sword case. Xian Li's figure reappeared, carrying the sword case on her back. Her blood-red eyes stared at Jia Luosher. When she saw Lin Feng, the blood-red light in her eyes gradually dissipated, and a rare emotional change appeared on her face. She was stubborn and angry, and she bit her lips and lowered her head. Lin Feng could not help laughing, and reached out to pat her head. Now you've suffered, haven't you? But don't be angry. We'll get revenge soon. As he spoke, Lin Feng's gaze fell on Jia Luosher and Sword Venerable Tiangang. Chapter 872. The moment Lin Feng used his finger as a sword to attack the falling rocks, Celestial Swordsman's eyes flashed with cold light. The broadsword in his hand was the ancient sword, Celestial Swordsman. With a shake of the blade, a cold light spread out in all directions. This time, Celestial Swordsman directly spread out his sword will. It was like a sea of sword light, covering the entire spherical light film around Yujing Mountain. A bright Celestial Swordsman appeared again, but this time, it was unprecedentedly huge. It was as vast as the galaxy in the universe, surrounding Yujing Mountain and wrapping it in its center. Endless sword light began to stab inside. This time, his sword will and sword light completely sealed off the void, making it impossible for Yujing Mountain to hide. The mysterious sky treasure tree didn't hide this time. Jade Jing Mountain emitted a chaotic and hazy light that continuously spread to the surroundings. Everything became hazy and unclear, as if there was only a dim grayish-white left. With Yujing Mountain as the center, it continued to spread in all directions. Everything in the world seemed to have lost its color. The Celestial Swordsman was incomparably sharp, as if it wanted to shatter the world and turn it into a world of sword light. But at this moment, all the light fell into a stillness, unable to move forward. In the void, it returned to its original appearance, like a huge transparent longsword. The sword light on the transparent blade was still flowing. At this moment, it stopped, causing some parts of the longsword to be completely transparent, and some parts to have spots of light. It looked exceptionally messy and mottled. The huge Celestial Swordsman's flashing light also became sluggish. Although it was not completely fixed, it seemed to have lost its vitality. Light flowed on the surface of the Celestial Swordsman, and a human face appeared. It was the expressionless Celestial Swordsman. He stared at Yujing Mountain and did not speak. He had combined the Celestial Sword Chi with his own Celestial Swordsman. Although he did not use his full strength, the power of Yujing Mountain's celestial light of universe was still important to him. On Yujing Mountain, after Lin Feng broke the sword will of the falling rocks, he looked at Xiao Yan and the other disciples, then at Xianli. His divine sense swept over the bipolar sky peak and monk Dade. Oh! Lin Feng's gaze turned slightly cold. His divine senses probed the old injuries on the twin celestial peaks and Zen Master Dade's bodies. He immediately discovered that they were caused by the falling rocks. He looked up at the face of Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, which filled the entire sky, and said lightly, "In the past, I said that I would visit Mount Shu when I had the time. There's no better time than today. Before that, why don't you wait a moment, fellow Taoist? I'll clean this place up first." As he spoke, Lin Feng's gaze landed on Su Anda, Xiao Dongtian, and the others. He smiled and said to Wang Lin, who was on the Permitha bridge, "Little Lin, hand over your mysterious sky god's sealing banner to me first." Wang Lin clapped his hands together, and a large purple flag appeared above his head. With a flash, it landed in Lin Feng's hands. Lin Feng took the flag and immediately smiled. "Oh, the primordial soul adepts imprisoned in it are almost all used up. But it's okay, I'll double the amount for you." As he spoke, he opened his palms, and purple air masses flew out. Each air mass was a spiritual sense pocket world, and in each pocket world, there was a vague figure of a person. After seeing the specific appearances of the figures in the spiritual sense pocket world, Xiao Dongtian and the others' faces immediately turned livid. Sword Venerable Vast Sea, Sword Venerable Raging Fire, several primordial soul elders of the reincarnation sect's Celestial Tao, primordial soul elders of the East Heaven Gate who guarded the Vermilion Sky Pagoda, Wu Shusen, the head of the reincarnation sect's Animal Path, Grand Master Shaoshang, Sword Venerable Li Meng, the head of the 6 lineages swordplay of the Mount Shu Sword Sect, Grand Master Sword Venerable Li Meng, every one of them was a primordial soul incarnation or a primordial soul of the Void Return Realm powerhouse. Other than the reincarnation sect's Hell Master, who had not used his full strength when fighting Tao Master Thundercloud and Tao Master Blue Thunder, all the primordial soul adepts that Lin Feng had previously captured were here. Under the horrified gazes of the crowd, Lin Feng waved his hand and all the purple air masses were swept up by the purple flag. As Sword Venerable Shaoshang and the others roared in indignation, their primordial souls were imprisoned by the Shantian God's sealing flag. Seeing this, Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper's pupils suddenly shrank. The heavenly dipper sword star that had enveloped Yujing Mountain began to collapse with a loud rumble. It was compressed towards the center and instantly fell into a violent sword will. Slowly but surely, it broke through the layers of light of extreme universe and pressed towards Yujing Mountain. The majestic power of the collapse caused the power of the entire heavenly dipper sword star to continuously increase. It was as if the galaxy of the universe was heading towards its end. Lin Feng turned a blind eye to this and patted the flagpole of the Shantian god's sealing flag with a chuckle. A cold-faced youth appeared on the flagpole. It was the primordial spirit of the Shantian god's sealing flag. The figure of light that the cold-faced youth had manifested suddenly became even more dazzling. It radiated resplendent light that illuminated the sky. Majestic and mysterious Dharma power spread out in all directions. The great Tao of heaven and earth gradually connected with the Shantian god's sealing flag and was guided to the primordial spirit of the Shantian god's sealing flag through the body of the magic treasure. Under the shocked gazes of Xiao Dongtian and the others, the figure of light of the cold-faced youth seemed to solidify. When his eyes opened and closed, it was as if he was a powerful life that was independent of the world. A Mahayana-level magic treasure, someone cried out in surprise. He could not believe what his eyes were seeing. A transformation-level magic treasure could be promoted to the Mahayana level so easily? Such a thing had completely subverted the understanding of everyone present. It made them feel incredulous, as if the entire world had become surreal. However, Lin Feng's hands did not stop. He waved the Shantian god's sealing flag with one hand and extended his other hand forward. Blurry purple gas gathered to form a huge palm. It grabbed one first-tier primordial spirit realm cultivator after another and used the Shantian god's sealing flag to absorb them. The first-tier primordial spirit realm cultivators were all captured. The huge purple gas hand continued to grab towards Dao Master Sky Ghost, Dao Master Dong Ming, and the other Void Return Realm experts. Su Anda, Xiao Dongtian, and the others were furious and depressed at the same time. Su Anda's hand seals changed, and his eyes turned into black abysses. Let's attack together and coordinate with Sword Venerable Tiangang from the Shushan sword sect outside. Only then can we escape. Xiao Dongtian did not say a word. He activated the last of the Great Heaven Will Replica's power and attacked Lin Feng. The Shantian seal and the Azura battle saber also attacked fiercely. The other cultivators used their mystiques, dermic powers, or magic treasures to attack Lin Feng. Only Zhang Enrui, the sect leader of the human realm, had a hesitant and solemn look on his face. Instead, he looked up at the indistinct child who had taken the book of life and death from the chaotic hole in the void. The child shook his head slowly. Zhang Enrui immediately let out a long sigh. Lin Feng saw the attacks of Su Anda, Xiao Dongtian, and the others, but he did not care at all. He chuckled, and a small dot of light flew out from Li Yuanfang's forehead on the Shantian treasure tree. Yin Yang Life and Death Array, activate. Lin Feng said calmly. Under his control, the small dot of light immediately spread out and transformed into a huge and mysterious array. The power of life and death rotated, and Su Anda and the others were all swept up. As soon as they entered the array, Su Anda and the others' hearts immediately sank. The Yin Yang Life and Death Array under Lin Feng's control was completely different from when Li Yuanfang activated it. The array swept up Su Anda and the others, but Lin Feng's expression did not change in the slightest. He was still leisurely and unhurriedly doing things at his original pace. A monstrous purple chi transformed into a huge hand that covered the sky and grabbed toward Daoist Heavenly Ghost. Daoist Heavenly Ghost released two powerful ghosts that were equivalent to primordial divinity returning to void stage. However, they were directly crushed by Lu Xing's palm and were caught along with Daoist Heavenly Ghost. With a wave of the purple flag, Daoist Heavenly Ghost was sucked into it. Even though Daoist Heavenly Ghost had manifested his primordial divinity return to void stage, he was still unable to resist. Millions upon millions of purple talismans formed one pattern after another and were deeply engraved on his primordial divinity return to void stage. Light flashed on the surface of the flag, and Taoist heavenly ghost's figure appeared. His features were numb, but his eyes were filled with agony and rage, and he was completely powerless to resist. Tao Venerate Dongming summoned a burst of green light, which flickered in and out of existence in the air. This was one of the 9 treasures of the ancient Heavenly Gate, the Heavenly Green Light Needle of the West. This treasure was once a Mahayana stage treasure, but it had suffered a calamity, and the treasure's origin spirit had been completely destroyed, leaving behind only an empty shell. Later on, it was obtained by a cultivator of the Eastern Heavenly Gate, who refined it wholeheartedly and finally nurtured the treasure's origin spirit. Even though it was now at the spirit conception stage, it was still extremely vicious after being imbued with Tao Venerate Dongming's return to void stage body. During the battle just then, it had faced off against the injured Sword Venerate Lu Guang and Sword Venerate Dongming, and both of them were extremely wary of it. However, Lin Feng's massive hand of purple energy instantly grabbed both Tao Venerate Dongming and the Heavenly Green Light Needle. Then, he tossed Tao Venerate Dongming's return to void stage body onto the dark Heavenly God's sealing banner. Emperor Song, one of the 10 Yama kings of the Dark Palace, was originally battling Zhu Yi's Haoyang clone. Now that Lin Feng had captured Tao Venerate Dongming, he couldn't help but let loose a shrill cry as his entire body transformed into a dark shadow. As it turned out, he had cultivated a Tao technique of the Middle Era's origin shadow demonic Tao. All he wanted was to escape from Lin Feng's grasp, and the dark shadow he had transformed into was like a drop of ink falling into a pool of water, quickly dispersing through the air. As long as even a sliver of it escaped, he would be able to escape. However, how was Lin Feng going to give him such a chance? The massive hand of purple energy spread open its 5 fingers, and its palm contained the universe. It grasped the boundless void between heaven and earth, and all the dark shadows were grasped in its palm. After capturing Emperor Song and tossing him onto the dark Heavenly God's sealing banner, Lin Feng's massive hand of purple energy made several grabs, and all the cultivators below the Tao integration stage were captured. Lin Feng's gaze turned to Jia Luoshe, who immediately felt like a sheep that had been targeted by a tiger or wolf. The others can be spared from death, but they can't be spared. As for you, you've committed suicide in this world, and your fate has come to an end. Lin Feng's expression was indifferent. Using his finger as a sword, he slashed it across Jia Luoshe's neck, which had already been pierced through. Jia Luoshe's consciousness was filled with shock and anger. He wanted to struggle, but he was powerless. Outside Yujing Mountain, all the sword light in the eyes of the Big Dipper Sword Lord was extinguished, but the monstrous sword intent became more and more violent, pressing down on Yujing Mountain from all directions. Lin Feng snorted coldly. Yujing Mountain, which seemed to be on the brink of collapse due to the cosmic light of extreme heavenly poles' repeated defeats, suddenly trembled. The power of the mysterious heavenly treasure tree, the cyclic purple qi, and the white Yujing Mountain combined, and a dazzling brilliance suddenly erupted. The majestic brilliance forcibly withstood the Big Dipper Sword Star, which was constantly collapsing toward the center, and even continued to expand outwards, as if it was going to burst the Big Dipper Sword Star. In the air, another voice sounded, "Master of the Celestial Gate, please spare him." Lin Feng's expression did not change. His fingertip continued to slash across, and with a flash of gray light, Jia Luoshe's neck was cut off. Jia Luoshe kept twisting and exploding with sword light, and once again condensed into his human form. However, at this moment, Lin Feng had already decapitated him. A large head flew into the air, and there was still an expression of disbelief on its face. Chapter 873. Seeing that he was blocked by the mana restriction on the peak of Jade Capital Mountain and Lin Feng's sword slashing towards Jia Luoshe's neck, Venerable Celestial Dipper looked at the terrifying gray sword aura on Lin Feng's fingertip and knew that if Jia Luoshe was hit by this sword, he would be beheaded like a normal person, completely killed here. Countless stars seemed to vanish in his eyes. In the sky, the void opened, and many stars in the universe shone together. The majestic power of the stars was added to his body, causing the Heavenly Dipper Sword Star to become even more dazzling. It was in a stalemate with the divine light emitted by Jade Capital Mountain. As the stars rose and fell, they turned into a dazzling Dao fruit. This Dao fruit flickered with a mysterious radiance and exuded a unique power that was indestructible and could transcend thousands of calamities and tribulations. Although Jia Luosher's immortal Heaven 9 Revolutions Dao fruit was also derived from the Sword Dao True fruit obtained from the immortal Heaven Sword Qi, it was completely different. Sword Venerable Big Dipper unfolded his immortal Heaven Galaxy River fruit and immediately unleashed his sword intent to the extreme. The Heavenly Dipper Sword Star began to press down on Jade Capital Mountain and collapse again. However, the dazzling radiance emitted by Jade Capital Mountain suddenly turned into a mass of gas. The crystal-like radiance emitted by the mysterious Heaven Treasure Tree and the chaotic hazy radiance emitted by Jade Capital Mountain merged into the cyclic purple Qi. As the surging purple Qi surged, it gradually turned into a kind of translucent white like jade. These white jade-like masses of gas circulated endlessly, blocking Sword Venerable Big Dipper's sword light and preventing it from advancing any further. The collapse of the Heavenly Dipper Sword Star was forcibly stopped once again. And right at this moment, Lin Feng raised his hand and his sword fell, already decapitating Xia Luosher in one strike. A great sword cultivator at the third stage Dao integration realm had been killed by Lin Feng just like that. In the distant void, a beam of light was projected outside Jade Capital Mountain and turned into a figure. It was a person with the appearance of a young girl who looked only 13 or 14 years old. There was a hint of coldness in her calm expression. She was a member of the Taishu Temple's Grand Supreme Elders Association and one of the 4 remaining Grand Supreme Elders from the previous generation, Dao Lord Qing Yi. However, it was not her who had come. Instead, it was a projection. It was a clone that she had left on the top of White Cloud Mountain. Her true body was currently in the infinite wilderness land of the demon race. Dao Master Qing Yi watched everything that was happening in front of him. Silently, he said, "Master of the Celestial Sect, must you do this?" Separated by Mount Yujing and Tiangang Sword Star, Lin Feng looked indifferently at the projection of Dao Master Qing Yi in the void and said calmly, "Since I established my sect on Kunlun Mountain, I have never killed too many people, but this does not mean that I am weak and can be bullied. If someone jumps out to pick a fight, I don't mind giving him a good death. My words are still the same. The war between the two worlds is coming. We humans need to truly unite as one, and not compromise and cooperate because of the situation." Since he had appeared, Tiangang's sword master, who had not said a word, still did not make any sound this time, but his divine sense spread between heaven and earth. Luosher is the highest elder of Mount Shu. He was killed. Mount Shu will not rest until he is dead. He did not argue whether Luosher's behavior was personal, nor did he argue whether Luosher was right or wrong. Since Luosher had been killed by Lin Feng, the hatred between Mount Shu Sword Sect and Xianmen Tianzong was irreconcilable. Only a battle could end it. There was still room for a low-level disciple to turn things around, but Luosher's cultivation and identity, no matter what the reason was, as long as he died unnaturally, it would inevitably mean an all-out war. Even if Luosher did not die, Mount Shu Sword Sect would not be able to bear the Xiantian God's sealing flag. Not to mention that many great sword cultivators at the level of Sword Master of Mount Shu Sword Sect had suffered heavy casualties in the hands of Xianmen Tianzong. The battle between the two sides was inevitable. Dao Master Qing Yi's eyes moved between Tiangang's Sword Master and Lin Feng. His expression was still cold, without any change. But those who were familiar with the inside story of Taishu Temple knew that among the 4 Taishu elders, Shoichi Dashin, the most cold-tempered and overbearing one was not the radical leader, Daoist Qing Yi, but Dao Master Qing Yi, who looked like a young girl. Lin Feng and Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper's expressions also did not change, they both looked calm and peaceful, but the atmosphere was tense to the point of almost freezing. Because of the existence of your sect and fellow Daoist Qing Yi, it is true that fellow Daoist Tiangang has always been watching from the side. But when Su Anda, Shao Dongtian, Luosher, and others went up the mountain, your sect did not stop them. So I also ask your sect to stay out of what I will do next. Lin Feng said lightly, Xianmen Tianzong is not an overbearing and arrogant place, but if someone bullies me, I will never be lenient, and I don't mind killing. Sword Master Vast Sea, Sword Master Raging Fire, Wushusen, Reincarnation Sex Animal Path Master Wushusen, Reincarnation Sex Hell Path Master Dark Master, Mount Shu Mountain Sword Master Shao Shang, and Sword Master Li Xiong have never set foot on my Yujing Mountain. Although I have imprisoned them with the Xiantian God-sealing flag, I will not make things too difficult for them. Except for Sword Master Shao Shang, who has made things difficult for my sect and will be punished for it, the others will only be punished as a warning. They will still see the light of day in the future. But today, no one who has set foot on my Yujing Mountain can leave. Lin Feng's gaze swept across the Xiantian God-sealing flag and the yin and yang life and death formation. His tone was calm, but the contents of his words made Taoist Sky Ghost, Dao Master Dong Ming, and the others on the flag shudder. No matter who it is, whoever owes me, Xianmen Tianzong, justice must be paid. If they dare to refuse, I will beat them until they pay. As he spoke, Lin Feng had already taken a step forward and was in front of the Reincarnation Sex Human Path Master, Zhang Enrui. Zhang Enrui sighed and put all the wine cups back into the leather pouch at his waist. Then, he tossed the small wine pot into the air. The wine pot tipped over, and an ocean of wine rushed down like a heavenly river towards Lin Feng. The fragrance of the wine spread everywhere. Even a primordial spirit cultivator would find it intoxicating when he smelled it. Their divine senses and thoughts would become sluggish. However, Lin Feng did not care at all. He took a deep breath, and like a dragon sucking in water, the vast ocean of wine twisted into a waterline in the air and fell into Lin Feng's mouth. Lin Feng's expression did not change at all. He reached out and grabbed at Zhang Enrui. Zhang Enrui said, "Forgive me, but I still don't want to use your flag." As he spoke, his body twisted violently and directly shed his body. Majestic spirit chi gathered and then suddenly exploded. He was actually going to commit suicide. A Dao integration realm expert was actually going to commit suicide. Even Xiao Yan and the others were shocked when they saw this scene. They did not expect Zhang Enrui to be so unyielding just because he did not want to use the Xiantian God-sealing flag. However, Lin Feng smiled and looked into the void. He looked at the dark space that seemed to be gradually disappearing because of the time river formed by the bell of creation. In that dark space, there was a child who looked to be 2 or 3 years old. However, his expression was calm and peaceful. Silently, he watched everything that was happening in front of him. An ancient scroll floated in front of him. It was the creation Dharma treasure, the Book of Life and Death. King of the Underworld, you really have extremely high attainments in the Tao of Life and Death. You are probably the top existence in the entire history of the great heaven primordial world. You can actually forcefully reverse life and death and reincarnate. Lin Feng said indifferently, "Unfortunately, it is no longer the era where you were high and mighty and controlled reincarnation. Life and death were determined by the netherworld." As he spoke, Lin Feng raised his palm like a blade and gently slashed in the air. Zhang Enrui, who had turned into boundless spirit chi and was about to explode, suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He felt that the death substitution technique he had obtained from the king of the underworld had been forcibly cut off by Lin Feng. If he continued to commit suicide, he would really be committing suicide. He would not be able to be reborn outside Jade Jing Mountain through the king of the underworld's secret technique. The next moment, Lin Feng stretched out his palm. Majestic purple chi firmly grasped him. With the suppression of dermic power, the collapsed spirit chi immediately calmed down. As the light converged, it turned back into Zhang Enrui's appearance. He had been captured by the purple chi hand and felt extremely depressed. If he had not been suppressed by Lin Feng after committing suicide, Lin Feng might not have been able to capture him alive like he had captured Taoist Sky Ghost and the others. "Your Majesty." Zhang Enrui looked up at the child in the dark chaotic hole. He was a spy on 3 sides, and his true loyalty was to the king of the underworld. Later, he was ordered to secretly collude with Su Anda, the master of the underworld hall. Then, under Su Anda's instructions, he betrayed his alliance with the Azura path and turned to the celestial path, helping Shi Tianfang unify the reincarnation sect. The child reached out and flipped through the Book of Life and Death. As the pages rustled, a majestic power that could reverse life and death passed through the void and shook Lin Feng's purple chi hand. However, it was not to attack Lin Feng, but to suppress Zhang Enrui to death. At the same time, Zhang Enrui's death substitution technique re-established a connection with the Book of Life and Death. He wanted to fake his death to help Zhang Enrui escape. He had enemies all over the world, and he had just reincarnated not long ago. The Book of Life and Death had only just been completed, so he didn't want to fight to the death with Lin Feng. If he became entangled in a fight and others surrounded him, that would be embarrassing. Seeing this, Lin Feng smiled. With a sweep of the river of time, he once again erased Zhang Enrui's death substitution rebirth secret technique. This time, no matter how hard Zhang Enrui tried, he was unable to re-establish the connection. On the other side, Lin Feng waved his hand. Specks of light that looked like dust appeared in the void. Then, these specks of dust suddenly spread out and turned into endless light, as if they were real worlds. For a moment, the entire world seemed to have lost all color. This endless light constantly infected the dark world that the Book of Life and Death had turned into, causing the lifeless world to seem to brighten up. This light passed through the river of time and continued upwards. With an unstoppable momentum, it swept up the Book of Life and Death. The childlike king of the underworld's expression didn't change at all. He gently tapped the Book of Life and Death with his finger and the dark world instantly turned black. In the pitch black, the endless light seemed to have lost its life and had fallen into a state of death, losing all vitality. But at this moment, Lin Feng suddenly smiled and the light suddenly brightened. At the same time, he flicked his finger. It was half a page. The mysterious power that came from the same source as the Book of Life and Death was activated at this moment. It turned into a thin white light that flowed along the river of time and directly extended towards the good fortune magic treasure, the Book of Life and Death. The king of the underworld's childlike face raised an eyebrow in surprise. Lin Feng spread out his fingers and grabbed at the void, making a tearing motion. The Book of Life and Death trembled violently as it was drawn in by the white light. Lin Feng almost pulled it out of the black hole. The childlike king of the underworld's eyes suddenly turned black. He stretched out his chubby white hand and slapped the Book of Life and Death, directly closing it. Majestic power shook the void and the black hole directly exploded. It forcibly shook off the restraints of Lin Feng's river of time and disappeared into the void turbulence. However, this tremendous force that was enough to tear the heavens apart caused an ear-piercing sound to ring out. Rip! It was as if a piece of paper had been torn apart. Chapter 874. The dark chaotic hole exploded and disappeared from the void. A childish voice reverberated between heaven and earth, but the tone was very old. It's still too early to say who the current era belongs to. Dao Master Qingyi said, but I'm sure it doesn't belong to you. The childish voice laughed softly and didn't say anything else. In terms of dealing with him, Taishu Temple was on the same side as Xianmen Tianzong. In the ancient era, it was Taishu Temple who joined forces with the ancient emperor and many forces to depose and overthrow him. If it weren't for the fact that the king of the underworld's whereabouts were hard to track and that Taishu Temple had to take care of the demon world in infinite region and vast land, they would have spent a lot of effort to find him. They wouldn't have given him a chance to rise again. Dao Master Qingyi was only a projection of his avatar here. If he was here in person, he would have joined forces with Lin Feng and wouldn't have let him escape so easily. Even Sword Master Tiangang didn't attack together with Lin Feng when he was fighting with him, but he also slowed down his attacks against Yujing Mountain. Lin Feng opened his palm. In addition to the half page in his hand, there were 3 more pages in his hand. Although Su Anda had fallen into the King of the Underworld's trap, the King of the Underworld didn't have everything under his control. The half page in Lin Feng's hand was beyond the King of the Underworld's expectations. If Lin Feng hadn't returned to the Void Realm, the king of the underworld might have vaguely sensed it through his connection with the Book of Life and Death. However, after Lin Feng returned to the Void Realm and his dermic powers skyrocketed, even the king of the underworld couldn't sense that he actually had half a page of the Book of Life and Death. This miscalculation had almost caused the king of the underworld to suffer greatly. It was only because of his close connection to the Book of Life and Death that he had been able to extricate himself in time. If it had been Su Anda, there was an 80% chance that Lin Feng would have taken the Book of Life and Death away. However, now that he had escaped, Zhang Enrui had nowhere to go. He could only watch as Lin Feng suppressed his primordial spirit dermic powers. Then, with a wave of the Xiantian god's sealing flag, he was sucked into the flag and suppressed. Although the fluctuation of divine sense gradually disappeared in the dark void, Lin Feng, Dao Master Qing Yi, and the others all knew that the king of the underworld was not happy. His own subordinate general had been captured in front of him, yet he was unable to protect him. This was a huge loss of face. When the king of the underworld's cultivation was restored and the Book of Life and Death was restored to its peak, or even to a higher level, he would definitely get back at him today. The king of the underworld did not make any verbal threats. However, the death intent that seemed to have condensed into a substance floated around and filled the air. "I'm not afraid of you coming. I'm just afraid that you'll run away and hide again." Lin Feng raised his eyebrows slightly and pushed the defense power of Yujing Mountain to the extreme. The white jade-like clouds overlapped and turned into a seemingly solid sea of clouds. It continued to block the Big Dipper Sword Venerable, who had once again rushed up to attack. He himself pointed at the yin and yang life and death formation and released it. Su Anda and the others who had been trapped in the formation immediately rushed out. "Since all of you have jumped out one by one, then don't leave. All of you, get on my Xiantian god's sealing flag and wait." Su Anda, the Azura battle saber, Shao Dongtian, and the Xiantian seal looked at each other. They could all see the same thoughts in each other's eyes. Although they knew that their chances were slim after witnessing Lin Feng's astonishing magic power, these two primordial Dao integration stage cultivators and two Mahayana grade Dharma treasures did not waver in the slightest. At their level, they would not sit around and wait for death. Even if the chances were slim, they would still fight with all their might. They all knew that this was a critical moment. They immediately unleashed their most powerful Dharma powers and attacked Lin Feng in a frenzy. Now that they were going all out, it was clear who was stronger and who was weaker. The Xiantian seal was not weak to begin with. However, it had been damaged by the heaven-crushing sword, Shao Yan, and Shi Tianhao. At this moment, it was the weakest. However, it still manifested a part of the sky and smashed down on Lin Feng's head. It was as if the sky was collapsing. The Azura battle saber's Dharma treasure, the primordial spirit battle Azura, had completely fused with its body. The jet-black battle saber flashed with a blood-red radiance. It was terrifying and filled with killing intent. However, this demonic saber that seemed to want to slaughter the world suddenly became gentle. As the blood-red radiance flowed, the entire saber transformed into a blood-red stream of light. It meandered between heaven and earth like a blood-red river. This blood-red river twisted and turned until it finally transformed into an extremely fragile blood-red light. It shuttled through the void, appearing and disappearing from time to time. However, it would be a huge mistake to think that this blood-red light was not as powerful as the Azura battle saber. In fact, it was the exact opposite. This was the state that the Azura battle saber was in when it had pushed its killing intent and boundless power to the peak. Threads of black gas wrapped around the blood-red light. Not only did they not weaken the blood-red light, but they also made it look even more ferocious and ferocious. This was the embodiment of the killing intent and death aura condensed to the extreme. Everywhere it passed, everything would wither and die. The deathly aura emitted from the Shura saber could almost be said to be the purest and strongest deathly aura that could be found in the vast land of the Divine Land. It was much stronger than the deathly aura that Lin Feng had obtained in the past. Threads of black death aura spread through the void, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. Although there was still a lot of light shining through, the world suddenly darkened and fell into a deathly stillness. It was as if all living beings would die. The Azura battle saber was like a fish in water amidst this black death aura. It turned into a flickering blood-red light and slashed at Lin Feng. The great celestial will replica in Xiao Dongtian's hand had lost a lot of its spiritual power. The light wheel had dimmed a lot. In the center of the light wheel, one could clearly see the white jade wheel covered in spiderweb-like cracks. It looked like it could shatter at any time. However, as long as it didn't shatter, the majestic power of the great celestial wheel would truly shake the world. At this moment, Xiao Dongtian was even more threatening than Su Anda, who had lost the Book of Life and Death. In the yin and yang life and death array, he was the one who brought the greatest pressure to the array. At this moment, Xiao Dongtian was also risking his life. He released his Dao integration Dao fruit, the true fruit of the great Dao of the heavens, and it turned into a damaged giant light wheel. He executed the supreme divine ability of the ancient heavenly gate, the heavenly wheel. Although his heavenly will was incomplete, it merged with the great celestial will replica at this moment. The two complemented each other, causing the majestic power of the great celestial wheel to become clearer. It covered the heavens and suppressed the myriad worlds, as if it wanted to spin the wheel of fate for all living beings in the world. The violent light wheel smashed down on Lin Feng's head. For a moment, it had the momentum of Zhu Honggu smashing down with the great celestial wheel in the Ying Sea. On the other side, although Su Anda had lost the Book of Life and Death, he still could not be underestimated. He was the last disciple of the King of the Underworld and the Master of the Underworld Hall. The King of the Underworld had once placed high hopes on him. Compared to his eldest senior brother, Daoist reincarnation, although his cultivation level was inferior, he had received more of the inheritance of the King of the Underworld. He was the most legitimate heir of the King of the Underworld's orthodoxy. His divine ability and Dharma power were exceptional, and he rarely met a match in the Dao integration realm. This time, among the enemies of Jade Capital Mountain, he was the strongest in terms of divine ability and Dharma power cultivation level. At this moment, he was fighting with his life on the line. Su Anda's eyes had completely turned pitch black like an endless abyss. The abyss could not be seen, but countless pain divine soul light shadows howled together. These howls converged into a substantial ripple that spread out. Wherever the ripple passed, the void was completely shattered. Those divine souls that were howling in pain originated from different cultivators. Their cultivation levels varied, but they had one thing in common when they were alive: their divine souls were extremely powerful and far beyond ordinary. Su Anda put his palms together slightly. Between the ripples, endless black light flowed towards him and gathered, turning into a black ball of light. Yu. Ming. Wan. Gu. Da. Destroy. Curse. Su Anda's voice rang out from the ball of light, enunciating each word clearly. As he sang, the black ball of light exploded with a bang, turning into a black rain of light that filled the sky. It almost completely filled up the world where Yujing Mountain was. The entire void was riddled with holes and shattered into pieces. Previously, the disobedient king, Sikongyu, had used this move to deal with the joint attacks of Wang Lin, Zhang Lai, King Chujiang, and the others, sweeping in all directions. At this moment, Su Anda gathered all the streams of light and bombarded Lin Feng. In the face of the terrifying attack that filled the entire area and threatened to destroy heaven and earth, Lin Feng's expression remained calm as he lightly tapped with his finger. Heaven and earth shattered. The endless surging earth, water, fire, and wind churned the entire void into chaos. The earth, water, fire, and wind returned to their positions and became balanced again. A bubble-like thing appeared in the void turbulence. The bubble instantly burst, and two streams of air, one clear and one turbid, rushed out. The turbid air sank, and the clear air rose. A powerful intent realm that could split heaven and earth manifested from within. This was none other than the primordial heaven opening technique. After Lin Feng returned to the void, the power of this technique had also increased a step further. The majestic power of splitting heaven and earth directly froze the space where Yujing Mountain was located. All the chaotic phenomena seemed to have been incorporated into the path of creation of heaven and earth. The dark heaven seal crashed down, and the collapsed and shattered sky became whole again. It hung high in the sky, and a dome covered the earth. The blood-red saber light that wanted to slaughter the common people and slay everything in this world was also frozen in the air. The black, destructive aura of death completely dissipated, and the blood-red saber light dissipated, revealing the original appearance of the black saber. Xiao Dongtian activated the imitation Great Celestial Wheel, and it was as if it could spin all the worlds in the world. At this moment, all the worlds were frozen. The huge wheel of light was unable to spin at all, and it fell into a standstill. Meanwhile, Su Anda's dark ancient annihilation mantra erupted. The black rain of light that filled the heaven and earth was no longer restless and chaotic. Instead, it transformed into streams of light that revolved endlessly between heaven and earth, transforming into a wave of light that was dazzling in its own way. A smile appeared on Lin Feng's lips. He placed his hands behind his back and walked forward leisurely in this world. He took a step forward and arrived before Xiao Dongtian. He nonchalantly extended his right hand and grasped the space. The huge wheel of light landed in his palm like a coin. The wheel of light flickered incessantly, emitting a screeching sound. It tried its best to spin in Lin Feng's hand, but Lin Feng clenched his fist tightly and held it in place. The two sides fell into a deadlock. But soon, the white jade wheel in the center of the wheel of light, which was already riddled with cracks, suddenly shattered and turned into dust. Chapter 875. Lin Feng held Xiao Dongtian's replica Great Celestial Wheel with one hand and extended a finger with the other. A terrifying gray sword flashed at the tip of his finger and pointed at the blue sky formed by the black heaven seal above his head. The blue sky immediately shattered. This was not the result of the black heaven seal's own divine power. Instead, it was destroyed by Lin Feng's sword. You are also called Black Heaven. Our sect's treasure tree is also called Black Heaven. Unfortunately, this Black Heaven is not that Black Heaven. Lin Feng smiled. After the sword strike, he waved his sleeve and put away the black ancient seal. Xiao Dongtian's mind was connected to the Black Heaven seal. He still wanted to struggle and resist, but the Black Heaven seal had already been suppressed by Lin Feng's dermic power. Lin Feng waved his heaven-punishing sword intent casually and pointed at the Azura battle saber. The Azura battle saber immediately let out a roar that sounded like a wounded beast. More and more divine souls appeared in Su Anda's eyes, directly flying out from his abyss-like eyes. Thousands of divine souls howled at the sky together. The sky instantly darkened and lost its luster. Countless spirits howled incessantly. Su Anda released several life and death netherworld Dao fruits that belonged to him at once. Although there were no Dao integration experts among them, the power of a few Dao fruits spread out. The original half-black and half-white color faded, and the Dao fruits turned pure black. The three Dao fruits emitted endless black light, enveloping the creation world formed by Jade Capital Mountain and turning the entire world black. The angry howls of the spirits shook the black sky and erupted with astonishing power. For a moment, there seemed to be only one color left in the world black. There was only one sound left, the angry howls of the spirits. This was the most powerful divine power of the underworld hall master Su Anda. It was combined with the great Dao divine power and secret technique that he had comprehended from the king of the underworld's orthodoxy, soul cries in the sky. Instantly, Yu Hongyan, Yang Qing, Li Yuanfang, Luo Qingguo, Kang Nanhua, and the other cultivators below the essence soul realm felt that their spirits were about to shatter. Even Xiao Yan, Zhu Yi, and the others who had attained nascent divinities felt their nascent divinities tremble. A cold glint flashed in Wang Lin's eyes. I'm afraid I'm the only one among my fellow disciples who can defend against this attack without using any magic treasures. If we want to break his magic, only eldest brother's five-colored fire lotus can do it. Yujing Mountain, which had always been wrestling with sword venerable celestial dipper, was now in trouble. There were changes happening internally, and their power became unstable. Bai Yuxianjian was constantly being pressured by Celestial Dipper Sword Star. Just as Zhu Yi was about to erect the Golden Paramitha Bridge to protect Xianmen Tianzong and the others, a clear whistle sounded from the dark sky. In the dark sky, a speck of light appeared, and then millions of rays of light covered the world. The dark sky was torn apart, and Yujing Mountain saw light again. Lin Feng was still wrestling with Xiao Dongtian's imitation Great Wheel of Heavens with one hand. He whistled and looked at Su Anda. This magic art of yours is quite original. It's a bit new in the orthodoxy of the king of the underworld. As he spoke, he clenched his other hand, and the rays of light that covered the world suddenly converged, surrounding Su Anda in the middle. The resplendent rays converged and turned into specks of dust. However, it was as if many small worlds were squeezing together, trapping Su Anda and making him unable to move. At the same time, in his palm, the white jade wheel in the center of the wheel of light, which was already full of cracks, suddenly shattered and no longer existed. Without the support of this treasure, the projection of the power of the Great Wheel of Heavens was immediately interrupted. Xiao Dongtian's gaze was calm, and the magic art of the Wheel of Heavens continued to advance, unwilling to admit defeat. Lin Feng shook his head. If it's Heavenly Emperor Kong, then it's still possible, but not you. As he finished speaking, he used his finger as a sword and stabbed out, piercing through the wheel of light formed by Xiao Dongtian's Wheel of Heavens. Xiao Dongtian sighed, and a complicated golden pattern appeared between his brows. It looked like a golden plate. The golden light receded, revealing an iron plate that looked like black iron. Upon closer inspection, only half of the iron plate was left. It was the death substitution golden plate refined by the Grand Emperor Alchemy Book iron plate in the ancient era. There wasn't much left of it. This golden plate would only come into play when receiving a fatal attack. It would help defend, and at the same time, break through the void and bring the holder of the golden plate away from danger, returning to where the other half of the Alchemy Book iron plate was. Dao Lord Dongming also had this treasure. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to use it before he was captured by Lin Feng. Xiao Dongtian stared at Lin Feng. He lifted his finger and shattered his golden plate. Instantly, rays of purple gold light flashed, wanting to sweep him up, break through the void, and escape. Lin Feng smiled and shook his head. The tyrannical heaven-punishing sword chi flashed with a gray light, slashing apart the purple gold light. At the same time, it chopped off one of Xiao Dongtian's arms. With my mysterious sky god's sealing banner, you can slowly cultivate and recover from your injuries. Lin Feng grabbed again, and Xiao Dongtian was captured. Then, he waved the mysterious sky god's sealing banner, causing Xiao Dongtian to follow in Zhang Enrui's footsteps. Next, Lin Feng closed his fingers, and the yin and yang dust that trapped Su Anda was compressed again. Black smoke rose from Su Anda's body, as if he was being burned by flames. Su Anda roared angrily, still wanting to struggle. Lin Feng closed his palms, and the yin and yang dust expanded with a loud bang, turning into layers of worlds. Then, in an instant, they rapidly compressed again, collapsing back into specks of dust. The power that seemed to contain the birth and death of worlds directly crushed Su Anda's body into black and white smoke. Then, he waved the mysterious sky god's sealing banner, and Su Anda was also sucked up. Then, Lin Feng made a grabbing motion toward the sky. The Azura saber, which had already been severely damaged, fell into his palm, and was suppressed together with the mysterious sky seal. After Su Anda's soul-crying sky screen was broken by Lin Feng, Yujing Mountain regrouped and once again withstood Sword Venerable Tiangong's attack. Although their line of defense was forced to retreat a lot because of the previous impact, they had regained their footing. Sword Venerable Tiangang and Dao Master Qing Yi looked as calm as before, but their eyes flickered slightly. Su Anda, the master of the Underworld Hall, was a cultivator at the peak of the Dao Integration Realm. Xiao Dongtian, the master of the East Heaven Gate, was a cultivator at the Dao Integration Realm. Xia Luosher, the Grand Supreme Elder of the Mount Shu Sword Sect, was a cultivator at the Tao Integration Realm. Zhang Enrui, the master of the human path of the Reincarnation Sect, was a cultivator at the Tao Integration Realm. Azura Saber, the Mahayana level, was a treasure with sharp attacks. Although the mysterious sky seal had been damaged before, it was still a magic treasure of the Mahayana level. In addition, there were also cultivators of the Void Return Realm, such as Tao Master Dong Ming, Emperor Song, and Taoist Sky Ghost. But in the blink of an eye, they were all killed and captured by Lin Feng. In an instant, they were all wiped out by Lin Feng. The king of the underworld's Book of Life and Death was almost taken away, and he had to pay a price to escape. Lin Feng raised his eyes and looked at the sword light that was like a vast sea of stars in the void outside of Jade Capital Mountain, calmly saying, "I've made you wait for a long time. Let's set off. Fellow Astral Dipper, I'll have to trouble you to lead the way." The white jade auspicious cloud that guarded the periphery of Yujing Mountains suddenly dispersed. But before Sword Venerable Tiangong's sword light could fall, Lin Feng patted the sword case on Xian Li's back, and a bright light shot up into the sky. Xian Li disappeared, a long sword that still carried a bit of rust but was extremely vicious, wanting to destroy the heavens and the earth had already fallen into Lin Feng's hands. Lin Feng grasped the heaven-crushing sword, and with a wave of the blade, the ferocious light retracted, and a blood-red sword light condensed on the tip of the sword. If one looked from the endless void turbulence outside, they would see a huge star of destruction hovering in the dark void. It was more dazzling and larger than any real star, and the power contained within it was also greater. A monstrous sword will shook the entire universe, and just the flickering light was enough to cut through the void, leaving cracks in space. But suddenly, the surface of the huge sword star shattered, and a small hole appeared. A blood-red light shot out from this hole, splitting the void and annihilating all space and time in its path. The dark space was split in half, leaving behind a trail of chaos. The blood-red light continued to expand, and the surface of the huge sword star, starting from the initial damage, continued to expand, and more cracks appeared. Many of the shattered sword lights seemed to have materialized and did not dissipate. Instead, they seemed to have real bodies and scattered into the void. The whole thing was like a broken piece of porcelain. Seeing this scene, Tao Master Qing Yi's expression didn't change at all, and his eyes were still cold. His projected figure gradually disappeared in the void, and he didn't leave a word. While the Haotian mirror was paying close attention to the strange movements of the demon clan in the vast land of Infinite Region, her original body had also rushed over. Taoist Lord Daoi and the others have yet to return, but Lin Feng has already returned to the boundless world. In a situation where Taoist Lord Taoist Clear's true body is not here, he cannot intervene in the battle between Lin Feng and Sword Lord Celestial Dipper. Sword Venerable Tiangong's expression was calm, but a cold light surged in his eyes. His monstrous sword will spread out, and his whole body seemed to transform into the universe, enveloping the world. At this moment, his body was much larger than an ordinary cultivator's law embodiment, primordial spirit incarnation, or void return dharma body. It was like the difference between the universe and dust. In the broken sword star, Lin Feng held the sky-crushing sword in one hand, pointing it at his feet, and the other hand behind his back leisurely. He stepped into the void and walked out of the wreckage of the sword star. Behind him was the white jade Jing Mountain, which was like a divine mountain. Lin Feng looked at Sword Venerable Tiangang and smiled. His body swayed, and it had already become as vast as the ruler of the universe. When he exhaled, there would be a void storm, and when he stomped, the world would collapse. When he opened his eyes, it was like the sun and the moon alternating. The sky-crushing sword in his hand was as large as the ancient sword in Sword Venerable Tiangong's hand. As the sword light flowed, it was like two galaxies spanning the universe. During the Battle of West Hill City, Lin Feng's primordial spirit contained the white jade Jing Mountain, which was why he was able to transform like this. However, after reaching the Void Return Realm, Lin Feng manifested his own power, and his Void Return Dharma body was completely unleashed. Thus, he also possessed the same might, and he didn't let Sword Venerable Tiangang, who was in the Dharma ending realm, have the upper hand. Lin Feng smiled faintly. You're a sword cultivator, so let's see who's better. As he said this, he waved the sky-crushing sword in his hand, and the vicious aura of heaven and earth converged, transforming into an invisible sword blade that could destroy heaven and earth, which slashed down towards Sword Venerable Tiangang. The entire heaven and earth seemed to be enshrouded by a crimson light, as if doomsday had arrived. Chapter 876. Amidst the lofty mountains and precipitous ridges of western Shu, on the six-pulse sword peak, on the main peak of Shu Mountain that was floating in the air, Exai and Longsheng and a skinny old man stood opposite each other in a small hall. The skinny old man was one of the great elders of the Shu Mountain sword sect, Sword Venerable Firmament of the same generation as Sword Venerable Tiangang. He wielded one of the two strongest swords in the Shu Mountain Immortal Heaven, Ancient Sword Venerable Firmament. Like Sword Venerable Tiangang, he had attained Tao in the Middle Epoch. Sword Venerable Firmament looked at Exai and Longsheng, and a thunderous voice came from his skinny body. Luo Shi was killed by the Master of the Xian Gate. Senior brother Tiangang is currently fighting with the Master of the Xian Gate. Exai and Longsheng looked up at the top of the hall. Junior brother Jia is the great elder of Shu Mountain. Regardless of whether his sword heart is unstable, he went to Kunlun to take the sky-punishing sword for Shu Mountain. However, I didn't expect the Master of the Xian Gate to return to the vast thousand domains so soon. Junior brother Jia was killed by the Master of the Xian Gate, and Shu Mountain must avenge him. Although Uncle Master Tiangang is strong, I'm afraid he won't be able to kill the Master of the Xian Gate. I'll bring the Immortal Heaven Sword to help him. Sword Venerable Firmament said, Shu Mountain must go all out in this battle. Even if it goes against the ancestral teachings, we can't care about that. Exai and Longsheng said, the ancestral master's order is prudent. In order to protect the foundation of Shu Mountain, one of the Immortal Heaven Sword and the sect returning scabbard must remain in Shu Mountain to suppress the great Immortal Heaven phenomenon sword formation and protect the sect. However, with martial uncle Tsang Ming and ancient sword Tsang Ming holding down the fort, the great Immortal Heaven's myriad phenomenon sword formation will not change. It can still operate as usual. However, if you're fighting someone, you can only use 80% of the sword formation's might. You haven't fully recovered from your blight tribulation. I'm afraid you won't be able to last long. Exai and Longsheng said, I do want to fight the Master of the Xian Gate again, but time waits for no man. I must go, even if it's just to deliver the Immortal Heaven Sword to Uncle Master Tiangang. Don't worry, I'll take care of the sect. Exai and Longsheng nodded his head and did not say anything else. With a flash, he transformed into a beam of white light that shot up into the sky. At the same time, in the main peak of Mount Shu, the space opened up, and a pure white, jade-like long sword appeared, shaking the world. There was only a faint light flowing on the white jade long sword. It was not dazzling, but it could make all the swords in the world bow. It was the treasure of the Mount Shu sword sect, the Dharma treasure of creation, the Emperor of Swords, the Immortal Heaven Sword. The Immortal Heaven Sword merged with Exai and Longsheng's white light and disappeared from the Great Thousand World. At the same time, in the chaotic space streams, outside Mount Yujing, Lin Feng smiled and said, let's fight it out with one sword each. Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable stared at Lin Feng and the Sky Destroyer Sword, his eyes bursting with a light that had never been seen before. His lips were tightly shut and he didn't speak, but his divine sense was so strong that it seemed like the entire divine land could hear his voice. That's my wish. The Celestial Dipper Sword will merged with the Immortal Heaven Sword Qi and turned into a white galaxy, intertwining with Lin Feng's Sky Destroyer Sword light. There were only two colors left in the world, the vast white and the mournful red, dividing the entire void into two. Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable's sword tip was vaguely similar to the Immortal Heaven Sword's sword will in West Hill City. Everything in the world became the sharp sword in his hand, and the spiritual qi of the entire Great Thousand World gathered to form the tip of the sword, slashing toward Lin Feng with an overwhelming force. Lin Feng waved his hand casually, using the malevolent chi of the world to form the tip of the sword to fight against Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable's majestic sword will. He didn't retreat even half a step. Both sides clashed continuously in the void, annihilating countless stars and leaving terrifying sword marks that turned into chaos in the dark universe. In every instant, there were countless collisions. Endless spiritual chi was destroyed, and endless malevolent chi dissipated. In the process of fighting with Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable, Lin Feng faintly felt something in his heart. Now it seems that the situation is a little different from my initial deduction, but it's even more advantageous. With this thought, Lin Feng looked at Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable in front of him. Divine light burst out from his eyes, and black and white light suddenly erupted from his body. From an extremely weak ray of light at the beginning, the black and white light alternated, becoming more and more dazzling. It turned into a sky full of light and clouds, supporting Lin Feng. It was as if a black and white sea of light filled the universe. Within this black and white sea of light, Lin Feng was like a previously sleeping god that had finally opened his eyes, gazing at the world and the wilderness. Countless mysterious runes and diagrams densely covered the void, turning into a vast light fog that filled the entire void. In the half-black and half-white light, the sky was filled with the chanting of gods and Buddhas. The gods and Buddhas turned corporeal and stood together on the light. It was as if they were standing on a bridge that crossed the heavens and reached the other side. Under the black and white divine light that illuminated the all-celestial palace, Lin Feng raised the heaven-punishing sword in his hand high and slashed down. The blood-red sword light swept up the malevolent chi of heaven and earth, turning into a world-destroying sword edge. The sword edge was also rolling with black and white light. In addition to the heaven-punishing sword light, Lin Feng's creation divine light was also integrated. Seeing this, Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable's eyes shone with a cold light. The Celestial Dipper Sword swept up the raging spiritual chi of heaven and earth and collided with Lin Feng's sword light. However, the spiritual chi sword edge was destroyed bit by bit. Good. Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable's spiritual sense fluctuated in the void. Where the sword light moved, it turned into a galaxy and clashed with the heaven-punishing sword. Although he was beaten back step by step, Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable's sword will became more and more majestic. At this moment, Lin Feng and Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable felt something in their hearts. They looked to the side and saw a crack suddenly open in the void. A middle-aged man in green slowly walked out, holding a white jade longsword. It was the current sect master of the Shushan sword sect, Xian Longsheng. Xian Longsheng held the white jade longsword as if he was lifting the weight of the world. A power even more majestic and powerful than Celestial Dipper Sword Venerables emerged. The heavens and earth were the sword, and all things were the edge. It targeted Lin Feng, making Lin Feng feel like he was surrounded by enemies in the vast universe. Seeing this, Lin Feng smiled slightly. Sect Master Xian, I have come to Shushan as promised. Thank you for coming out to welcome me. Xian Longsheng raised the immortal heaven sword and pointed it at Lin Feng. If I kill you here, you won't be able to see the mountains and rivers of Shushan. Lin Feng laughed. How can that be? With you two as my guides, I will travel all over the mountains of western Shu. As he spoke, a dot of light suddenly flew out from between Lin Feng's eyebrows. The dot of light rapidly expanded in the void and completely unfolded. Countless rays of light intertwined in a strange trajectory and pattern in the universe to form a huge array. It was the yin and yang life and death array. In the array, the 6 changes of heaven and earth, life and death, yin and yang, eternity and instant, void and real, and light and dark unfolded together. The 6 daos of life and death were born together, almost directly forming a complete new world. In the void of the universe, the vast power of the realms surged, causing friction with the original realm of the boundless universe, and the edges of the 2 worlds were distorted together. Lin Feng made a hand seal with his left hand. Yin and yang life and death array, 6 changes and 3 laws, 2 limitless extremes, open. The yin and yang life and death array suddenly erupted with endless light that spread in all directions, turning into an all-encompassing barrier that directly enveloped Xian Longsheng and the immortal heaven sword. Xian Longsheng's eyes were cold. If this array can't trap Taishu Temple, how can it trap my immortal heaven sword, which is more lethal? He waved his hand, and the yin and yang life and death array shook violently wherever the immortal heaven sword pointed. The huge barrier of light was almost immediately split in half. Lin Feng waved the heaven-crushing sword and clashed with sword Venerable Tiangang again. Then, he said indifferently, "Oh, is that so?" He waved his left hand, and 49 small dots of light flew out. Each of them was like a speck of dust, but they seemed to contain an extremely vast world. The 49 yin and yang dust particles fell into the yin and yang life and death array together. The particles all expanded and exploded with astonishing light, as if they were real worlds. The vast power of this light merged with the yin and yang life and death array, deducing thousands of changes in the array as if it was really creating a creation and shaping a world. In the array that was as majestic as a boundless thousand world, a vast mist of light could be vaguely seen. However, there seemed to be 49 small dots of light forming a wonderful array. They flashed together, and the next moment, it seemed to transform into an ethereal and vast space, filled with the mysterious intent of creating all living beings. This was the core treasure that Lin Feng used all 49 of his yin and yang dust particles to suppress the yin and yang life and death array. Immediately, the yin and yang life and death array erupted with astonishing power, allowing him to fight with sword Venerable Tiangang while fighting with the immortal heaven sword controlled by Xian Longsheng. Even Xian Longsheng was surprised. He didn't expect that the yin and yang life and death formation would change so dramatically in an instant that it could forcibly trap the immortal heaven sword, a divine sword with one of the best killing power among the magic treasures of creation. The world formed by the 49 yin and yang dust particles was connected to Lin Feng's mind. It was almost like an incarnation of him, and he could freely activate the yin and yang life and death array. 6 transformations and 3 laws, reversal of 2 poles, open. The new world formed by the array immediately changed again. The sky was turned upside down, the dead came back to life, yin and yang reversed, time reversed, false returned to reality, light and darkness reversed. The entire world gave birth to a huge force of reversal and distortion. This majestic force even affected the boundless thousand worlds that were in contact with this world. The void shattered and turned into nothingness. Although it's stronger than when it was in West Hill City, it still can't trap the immortal heaven sword for too long. Xian Longsheng calmed down. The immortal heaven sword's blade forcibly cut through all kinds of disasters and changes in the world, and the earth-shattering sharpness wanted to split this part of the world. The yin and yang life and death array displayed many changes, fighting against the immortal heaven sword and Xian Longsheng. On the other side, Lin Feng and Celestial Dipper Sword Master were also fighting fiercely. The two of them fought as they walked. Lin Feng had the upper hand and forced Celestial Dipper Sword Master to retreat. Suddenly, the universe was completely broken. Lin Feng brought the yin and yang life and death array back to the boundless thousand worlds with Celestial Dipper Sword Master. Celestial Dipper Sword Master was stunned by the scene in front of him. He was very familiar with this place. Among the mountains, 6 solitary peaks rose into the sky. Each one was straight and steep, piercing the clouds like 6 extremely huge unsheathed swords. In the sky above the 6 mountains, there was actually another mountain that floated in the sky. There was no support below it, but it was lifted up by the sword chi from the 6 mountains, hovering in the sky. This was the location of his Shu Mountain sect. The great immortal universe sword array was placed here, the foundation of Shu Mountain. Not only did Lin Feng fight with him, Xian Longsheng, and the immortal heaven sword, but he also took the initiative to shift the battlefield to his Shu Mountain sect. Lin Feng's body shrank and landed among the mountains of western Shu. He strolled leisurely on the plank road. Chapter 877. At this moment, on Mount Shu, there was already a gloomy atmosphere. On the sword peak controlled by the Moon's Sword lineage, there were no visible injuries on the face of the Moon's Sword Lord. Only the feminine sharpness was not as dazzling as before. He was injured by Xiao Yan and Zen Master Dade. Even with the protection of the falling stone sword intent, his void-returned Dharma body was still damaged and it would take a long time to recover. But at this moment, he still needed to use the Moon Sword Lord to help the Shaozi Sword Lord and Guanchong Sword Lord to heal their primordial spirits. Of these two, one had his void-returned Dharma body shattered by Shi Tianhao, and the other almost died under Xiao Yan's palm. Both of them were seriously injured. Compared to their own injuries, these great sword cultivators were even more depressed at the moment. The disciples were still hidden from them, but they had already received the news from Exa and Longsheng that the master of the Celestial Sect had returned to Jade Jing Mountain and wiped out the Xian Annihilation Coalition. Su Anda of the Underworld Hall, Xiao Dongtian of the Eastern Heaven Gate, and Zhang Enrui of the Reincarnation Sect were all captured. And their Shushan Grand Elder, Xia Luoshi, was killed by Lin Feng on the spot. The Celestial Dipper Sword Lord was nearby, but he was stopped by Lin Feng and could only watch him kill. This news was like a bolt from the blue, making Guanchong Sword Lord and the others dizzy. In addition, the Shaoshang Sword Lord and Li Xiong Sword Lord, who were responsible for intercepting the Northern Militant Royal Court, were also captured by Lin Feng. This was another piece of bad news. Opposite the Moon Sword Lord, sat a middle-aged man with a square face. He was the Shaoyang Sword Lord who had never left the mountain. Even though the Shaoyang Sword Lord had always been calm, he felt depressed at this moment. His usually calm state of mind was fluctuating violently at this moment. This great sword cultivator, who was faintly the #1 Grandmaster of the 6 lineages Sword Master, actually didn't dare to face his own junior disciples. The Moon Sword Lord, Guanchong Sword Lord, and Shaozi Sword Lord returned with serious injuries one after another. Although the news did not spread on a large scale, it still caused a fierce shock in Mount Shu. Originally, they were all waiting for news from the stone, hoping that the stone would succeed. After all, the master of the Celestial Sect of Wonders was not there. The stone had also brought the sect returning scabbard over, so it should be able to retrieve the heaven-punishing sword. Who would have thought that the person who was removing the falling rocks would not come back, but the news of his death? While Sword Venerable Xiao Yang and the others were shocked and furious, they also felt a sense of disappointment. Ever since the confrontation with Xianmen Tianzong, Shu Mountain had never gained the upper hand. On the contrary, they had suffered heavy losses. The Grandine Sword Sovereign gritted his teeth and said, "The sect master has already made an exception and brought the immortal heaven sword out of seclusion to meet up with Elder Tiangang. This time, even if we have to pay a price, we must kill the master of the Celestial Gate. We must avenge Elder Jia and our injuries." Shaozi Sword Lord's face was gloomy and he did not speak. Guanchong Sword Lord was the most seriously injured. Even after treatment, he was barely hanging on to his last breath. Hearing Sword Venerable Xiao Yang's words, his wooden eyes flickered with a cold light. Sword Venerable Xiao Yang said in a low voice, "Since this fiend has returned, his Yujing Mountain has also regained the ability to escape into the void. Elder Tiangang and the sect master together may be able to defeat him, but it is still not enough to kill this fiend. We must force him into a situation where he cannot escape, set up an inescapable net, and kill him." As Sword Venerable Xiao Yang spoke, he suddenly had a thought. Earlier than him, Sword Venerable Xiao Yang had left the Great Hall at the top of the Moon Sword Peak. Looking down the mountain, he saw a young man in purple leisurely strolling through the mountains of Western Shu. His expression was relaxed, and he was even leisurely looking at the scenery around him as if he was on an outing. But this person's appearance was unforgettable in the hearts of everyone in Shushan. It was the sect master of Xianmen, Lin Feng. There was an auspicious cloud above Lin Feng's head. The yin-yang life and death formation glowed brightly, as if it had manifested a real world. This world was filled with sword qi, shuttling back and forth. And above the yin-yang life and death formation, a sea of purple clouds rolled, and a white jade immortal mountain was faintly discernible. In the sky above the peak of Shushan, the canopy opened, revealing the distant galaxy. A huge figure appeared above Shushan. It was Sword Venerable Tiangang. The tip of his sword was firmly locked onto Lin Feng before him. In the great hall at the main peak of Shushan, Sword Venerable Firmament's face was as dark as still water. He was also staring at Lin Feng, who was strolling leisurely down the mountain. This time, Lin Feng did not hide his aura. He fully unleashed his vast spiritual power, and the entire Shushan was shaking. The cultivators of Shushan Sword Sect discovered Lin Feng one after another. Those with higher cultivation and status who knew about the Xian extermination battle all felt their hearts sink. Since Lin Feng was here, it meant that the Xian extermination coalition army had failed to attack the mountain. And some Shushan sword cultivators who did not know the truth were furious. How dare he come to our mountain gate? Does Xianmen Tianzong really think that he is above Shushan? This demon is too arrogant. He will definitely follow in the footsteps of the Blood River Man and the primordial Taotai. He will be killed by the great immortal Heaven Sword formation and the immortal Heaven Sword. Patriarch above, this demon must be killed. Sword Venerable Firmament trembled with anger. This person is boundlessly arrogant. Sword Venerable Firmament's son narrowed his eyes. This is the first time that Shushan has been attacked since it entered the modern era. It can be called the first major tribulation since the modern era. But as long as we survive this tribulation, Shushan will definitely be able to reach a higher level. Sword Venerable Firmament's son stared at Lin Feng. Even if we don't kill him this time, we must break his sky-crushing sword. Even if he retreats, he must pay the price. Almost at the same time, several cracks appeared in the void outside Shushan, and people walked out of them one after another. There were two people on the left. One of them was a tall middle-aged man. His whole body was like a gloomy thundercloud that never rained. Hidden in his dull appearance was an incomparably violent power. It was the current sect master of Purple Cloud Path, Tao Master Thundercloud. And the old man standing next to him was naturally the elder of Purple Cloud Path and Tao Master Thundercloud's senior brother, Tao Master Blue Thunder. Both of them looked in the direction of Shushan with a dignified expression. For a moment, they could not figure out what Lin Feng meant. Beside them stood an old man dressed in black with a blue thunderbolt pattern embroidered on his lapel. His hair and beard were all fluttering, and he looked extremely mighty. He was the current leader of the Thunderbolt Sword Sect, the Thunderbolt Sword Venerable. He looked at Shushan with a somewhat complicated expression. Disgust, hatred, fear, admiration, and other emotions flashed across his face. The other person who had the same expression as Sword Venerable of Thunderbolt was a middle-aged man in yellow with a calm expression on his face. He was the sect master of Wilderness Sword Sect and the current Sword Venerable of the Wilderness. They had always lived in the shadow of Shushan and had extremely complicated feelings for the first holy land of Tianyuan swordsmanship. Even though they had chosen to support Xianmen Tianzong, they still could not calm down in the face of Shushan Sword Sect. They looked at Lin Feng, who was strolling in the mountains of western Shu, with a somewhat complicated expression, as if they were looking forward to something, but they lacked confidence and were worried about gains and losses. Sword Venerable of Thunderbolt and Sword Venerable of the Great Wilderness did not speak, but Longevity Heavenly Spear said in a deep voice, "I admire the master of the Celestial Sect for his extraordinary cultivation. But since the Immortal Heaven Sword and the Big Dipper Sword Venerable have come out, why did he come to Shushan to fight with them?" No matter which force it was, their own mountain gate was the most stable and had an absolute geographical advantage. Taking the initiative to attack someone else's nest, unless one's strength was significantly higher than the other party's, in most cases, one would be badly battered and bleeding in front of the other party's nest. The Great Immortal Phenomenon Sword Formation of Shushan Sword Sect was a formation that was as famous as the Taishu Temple's Great Void Yin-Yang Formation and the Great Leiyin Temple's Vairocana Formation. It was also one of the most powerful formations in the Divine Land, with extremely powerful killing power. Lin Feng's Yujing Mountain could travel through time and space at will. In a sense, he was indeed the least afraid of going deep into the enemy's mountain gate. Any geographical advantage did not exist in front of him, because he could instantly turn the opponent's home ground into a neutral ground, or even his own home ground. But facing the great immortal phenomenon sword formation of Shushan, this advantage would basically be wiped out. Moreover, whether it was the sect master of Shushan sword sect Xan Longsheng, sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper, or sword Venerable Firmament, none of them would sit back and watch Lin Feng attack their own formation. Therefore, for a moment, everyone could not figure out what Lin Feng meant. Hearing Longevity Heavenly Spear's words, the northern militant high priest slowly shook his head. I don't understand either. Longevity Heavenly Spear frowned and said, could it be that he was blinded by his previous victory or anger? That's not good. It was not only the forces that were on good terms with Xianmen Tianzong. In the distance, on the border between the Great Zhou Empire and the Great Qin Empire, Emperor Qin's Stonefeather, Emperor Zhou's Liang Pan, and Zhu Hongwu were also looking at Shushan through the layers of void. Previously, the battle between Lin Feng and sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper in the void was earth-shattering. With such a big movement, Stonefeather and the other two had been paying attention through the immortal Dragon City and the other two great treasures of creation. At this moment, seeing that Lin Feng had taken the initiative to come to Shushan's doorstep, even they could not see through it. The Master of the Celestial Gate is indeed extraordinary. Even sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper would be at a disadvantage against him. His yin and yang life and death formation is even stronger than the one in West Hill City. It can actually trap the immortal heaven sword. Zhu Hongwu's eyes flickered. In the vast land of the Divine Land, there was a consensus that the cultivation world did not declare, but they all had in their hearts that the celestial sect of Xianmen was very shameless from head to toe. Because other than the mountain gate Yujing Mountain, even the great mountain protecting formation of life and death could move independently and freely. When Lin Feng attacked other people's mountain gates, he was never a commander without an army. Instead, he had to add Yujing Mountain and the formation of life and death, two powerful forces that could fight independently. The Master of the Celestial Gate can defeat sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper, but it is not enough to kill him completely. Although his yin and yang life and death formation is stronger, I'm afraid it cannot trap Xan Longsheng and the immortal heaven sword for a long time. It seems that he is at a disadvantage. His Yujing Mountain can suppress the great immortal heaven sword formation, but it may not be able to break it completely. If sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper controls the immortal heaven sword formation, Shu Mountain will be even stronger. Zhu Hongwu said in a low voice, comparing the two, it is at best an undefeatable situation. Even with that unfilial son's Permitha bridge, he may be able to suppress Shu Mountain and gain the upper hand. Right now, Xianmen Tianzong is indeed above Shu Mountain, but it is impossible for him to completely destroy Shu Mountain. Liang Pan's expression was calm, but there was some confusion in his eyes. Hongwu, you are right. In that case, why did he take the initiative to come to Shu Mountain and challenge the great immortal heaven sword formation? Just fighting the immortal heaven sword and sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper in the void would have a much better chance of winning. Chapter 878. Not only were Liang Pan and Zhu Hongwu confused, but Stonefeather and the others from the Qin dynasty were also confused. What does the Master of the Xian Gate want? Is it just to humiliate Shushan? But there's no need to do this. Defeating the Big Dipper sword Venerable and Xan Longsheng with the immortal heaven sword in his hand in the void can achieve the same effect. If the Master of the Celestial Sect of Wonders is willing to pay a price, he can even make one of them fall completely. He came to Shu Mountain just to look good, and ended up in a stalemate. Why bother? Lord Rosenshire Zhongmao frowned. Does the Master of the Celestial Sect have other tricks up his sleeves? Emperor Stonefeather did not say anything and looked into the distance. Emperor Liang Pan sent a message to Zhu Hongwu. Hongwu, depending on the situation, I will hold Immortal Dragon City back if necessary. You go to Shushan. He paused and said silently, it is not necessary to target Xianmen Tianzong. The important thing is to improve Great Zhou. Zhu Hongwu answered, your subject obeys. On Shushan, sword Venerable Firmament snorted. If you want to climb Shushan and see the great immortal manifestation sword formation, I will satisfy you. He formed a sword seal with his right hand and pointed at the sky. A vast clear light suddenly fell from the sky and turned into a powerful light pillar that enveloped sword venerable firmament. The vast sword will was like a vast world, boundless and enveloping the entire great thousand world. A hole opened at the top of the pillar of light, and an ancient bronze longsword slowly descended from it. The surface of the longsword was covered in sword light, vast but not dazzling. It was the ancient sword of firmament, one of the two strongest swords below the Shushan immortal sky sword, alongside the ancient sword of heavenly dipper. Sword venerable firmament grasped ancient sword venerable firmament. The powerful light pillar that enveloped him started to spread in all directions as if it was going to cover the entire world. The entire Mount Shu began to shake violently. The 6 mountain peaks that belonged to the 6 pulse swords were shaking with a loud rumble. On each mountain peak that was like a sharp sword that pointed towards the sky, a thick pillar of light soared into the sky, surrounding and protecting the main peak of Mount Shu and swordsman firmament. The beam of light from New Sun Sword Peak was vast and peaceful. The aura of the Way of the King was awe-inspiring and did not allow anyone to offend it lightly. The pillar of light from the Little Shang Sword Peak was the thickest, the cold light flashing, intimidating one's soul. The sword intent was also the most fierce and violent. Within the Shaozi Sword Peak's pillar of light, countless space fragments resonated with each other, sparkling and translucent. The concept of time fused into it and countless shadows flashed. The light pillar of the Guanchong Sword Peak was pure black, like a hard stone or iron, extremely heavy. The light pillar of the Lifeng Sword Peak was the weakest, but it contained the fiercest killing intent. The Lunar Sword Peak, on the other hand, was a pillar of qi that floated up to the 9 heavens. It was soft and flexible, ever-changing and unpredictable. Under the protection of the 6 sword peaks, the main peak of Mount Shu, which was originally suspended in the air, continued to rise into the sky amidst loud rumbling sounds. Below the main peak of Shushan, a huge pillar of air appeared. The pillar of air fell in the middle of the 6 peaks below, as if it was a pillar that supported the main peak of Shushan. Within the pillar of air, shadows rose and fell, and impressively, an uncountable number of swords were suspended in the air. Countless sharp swords, at this moment, in the pillar of air, had transformed into the shape of light swords. The light swords sometimes maintained their original appearance, and at other times, transformed into all kinds of images. There were flood dragons in the sea, fierce tigers in the mountains, lonely peaks and precipitous cliffs, rivers and lakes, and the images were all-encompassing, as if they contained all things in the world. These illusions were flowing with divine light, looking vivid and lifelike. The only similarity was that each image contained a biting cold sword intent. However, at this moment, these sword intents seemed a little manic, as if they were not satisfied with being bound by the pillar of air. They wanted to break free from the pillar of air and fly into the sky. Venerable Firmament, holding the ancient sword Firmament, left the main peak of Shushan, and directly fell into the pillar of air. Immediately, around the pillar of air, on each of the 6 peaks of Shushan's 6 meridian swords, a huge circular spirit design appeared. These 6 prototype spirit designs were like rings on the waist of each of the 6 peaks. An even larger circular spirit design, which seemed to encompass the heavens, appeared in the shape of a ring around the waist of the main peak of Shushan, and expanded in all directions. The light pillars on the 6 sword peaks rose upwards, and all merged into it. Within the pillar of air below the main peak, the light and shadows gradually disappeared. Endless sword shadows and scenes of all things in the world rose and fell in the largest circular spirit design, and there was no need for them to emerge. A vast expanse of white, overwhelming sword aura surged in all directions like a tidal wave. It was as vast as the waves, yet incomparably sharp, cutting through the heavens and the earth. This was the protective formation of Shushan, the great immortal heaven's thousand phenomenon sword formation. Lin Feng carefully felt the changes in the formation, and his eyes became brighter and brighter. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he nodded repeatedly. Not bad, not bad. It is indeed extraordinary. As expected of the world-shocking formation that once heavily injured Blood River Man and broke the primordial Taotia's belly. It is indeed unique. Lin Feng clicked his tongue in praise. The thunderous voice of Sword Venerable Firmament came from Shushan, master of the Mystic Gate. Take a sword from Shushan. The huge great immortal heaven all manifestations sword formation suddenly activated, and within the circular light formation, thousands of sword auras turned into raging waves, blasting towards Lin Feng. These sword auras were not just pure sword intent, but contained all kinds of innumerable truths of the great Tao. There were sword auras that evolved into boundless flames, about to burn the sky and boil the sea. There were sword auras that evolved into a magnificent sea, roaring and surging. There were sword auras that evolved into stars in the sky, and the stars moved and changed their positions. There were sword auras that evolved into thunderbolts, constantly exploding. There were sword auras that evolved into torrential rains and gales, continuous and unending. Everything in the world was magnificent, and all of them evolved within the great immortal heaven all manifestations sword formation. However, all of this did not appear messy or scattered, and the power of the sword formation was not diluted. Instead, everything was fused into a furnace, as though a real world was manifested, and it suppressed towards Lin Feng. At the same time, Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper also moved forward, and with a swing of his sword, the sky split open. The sword auras and starlight merged, covering the sky and falling towards Lin Feng. Xian Longsheng and the immortal heaven sword were also charging left and right inside the yin and yang life and death formation, wanting to kill their way out. Lin Feng looked at the sword formation in front of him and nodded his head. This shouldn't be the strongest state of this formation. Otherwise, in terms of pure offensive power, this formation alone can compete with a creation magic treasure. Right now, it's not too far off. It should be because Sword Sovereign Firmament is presiding over it. It can't unleash its strongest power because it lacks a treasure to suppress the formation core. In that case, that strange sect returning scabbard should be the treasure to suppress this formation, and the immortal heaven sword might be able to do so as well. Unfortunately, neither of them is here now. This Sword Venerable Firmament should be at the first tribulation stage, and he hasn't completely completed his first tribulation. His sword intent is compatible with the Great Immortal Universe sword formation, which is equivalent to two first tribulation stage cultivators fighting together. It's not much weaker than Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper or the Immortal Heaven Sword. Feeling the sword intent and sword chi of the Great Immortal Heaven Thousand Phenomenon sword formation, Lin Feng's mind spun like lightning in an instant, already analyzing the situation clearly. Looking at the huge sword formation, he said with a smile, "All of you want to fight with me? No rush, no rush. Today, all of you have a share, and none of you can escape." With a shake of the heaven-crushing sword in his right hand, he first attacked Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper. Then, he spread open his left hand and pressed down on the Great Immortal Universe sword formation. Amidst the rumbling, the purple sea of clouds kept tumbling, and Yujing Mountain descended onto the mortal world, falling toward Shu Mountain. At the peak of Shu Mountain, a sword aura like the blue sky soared into the sky, blocking the falling Yujing Mountain. At the peak of Yujing Mountain, the mysterious sky treasure tree emitted a light that resembled a crystal barrier. Together with the chaotic light of Yujing Mountain itself, they merged into the cyclic purple chi. As the purple chi surged, it gradually turned into a translucent white, like jade. The white jade clouds continued to fall, carrying Yujing Mountain. The majestic sword aura, which was as vast as the sky, could not withstand it and kept shattering, as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. The light waves released by the Great Immortal Universe sword formation returned to the main peak of Shu Mountain, merging with the sword aura of firmament. Together, they rose up and finally blocked the falling Yujing Mountain. The two great forces clashed, as if two worlds were constantly confronting each other. Below Yujing Mountain and above Shu Mountain, the void was constantly being destroyed and shattered. The majestic forces of the two worlds pressed together, causing spatial cracks to appear. However, they were not ordinary black spatial cracks, but cracks that flashed with dazzling light. These were cracks that had been formed when the power of a realm was activated, forcibly squeezing out the cracks of the great thousand realms. The vast space between the two mountains was filled with such spatial cracks, as if the world was about to be destroyed. It looked extremely terrifying. Seeing that the great immortal universe sword formation was being suppressed by Yujing Mountain, Celestial Dipper Swordsman took a deep breath and raised the ancient sword Celestial Dipper high. The immortal heaven galaxy river fruit appeared, and the majestic Celestial Dipper sword Chi and Celestial Dipper sword will converged. The cracks in the sky caused the starry sky to tremble. It was not just a tremble, but the entire Milky Way was really trembling. Celestial Dipper Swordsman activated his dermic power and sword will, causing the stars in the sky to fall together. They seemed to transform into his sword edge, attacking Lin Feng. Tens of thousands of sword auras spiraled and merged, forming a majestic sword aura. Tens of thousands of sword auras gathered together, forming a dazzling sword aura. Tens of thousands of dazzling sword auras crisscrossed, forming a terrifying sword formation that shook the heavens and the earth. Tens of thousands of sword auras merged with the stars in the sky, forming an even more terrifying Celestial Dipper sword star. Now, many Celestial Dipper sword stars had gathered together, forming a celestial river of sword light. A celestial river flowed straight down, sweeping towards Lin Feng. Within the celestial river, numerous Celestial Dipper sword stars, innumerable terrifying sword formations, innumerable resplendent sword lights, innumerable vigorous sword auras, innumerable sharp sword auras, all of it converged into this one sword strike. This was the strongest sword attack that Celestial Dipper Swordsman had condensed in his lifetime cultivation. Lin Feng looked at the sword aura and nodded slightly. Let's fight. He raised the heaven-punishing sword high up, and a boundless bloodlight filled the sky. All the acupoints on his body were pulsating, and each acupoint lit up with a ball of light. Within each ball of light, there seemed to be a god awakening, chanting the great Tao of heaven and earth together. The power of the many light shadows gathered together, shaking the heavens and earth. As the black and white light flickered, it fused with the blood-red heaven-punishing sword, forming a blurry and gloomy sword aura that struck fear in everyone's heart. It was like a rainbow that could destroy the heavens and the earth, and it slashed towards Celestial Dipper Sword Star River. Chapter 879. All the spectators widened their eyes at this moment. Even the White Cloud Mountain, the gate of the Taishu Temple, had a faint fluctuation of divine senses, paying close attention to this duel. Sword Venerable of the Thunderbolt, Sword Venerable of the Great Wilderness, Sword Venerable of Flowing Light, and the others widened their eyes and stared at the place where the two swords met. They were extremely nervous and had an indescribable and extremely complicated feeling. Lin Feng waved his sword, and the blurry and dark sword light seemed to mark the end of a world of creation. A faint sound rang between heaven and earth, ethereal and mournful, as if they were singing an elegy together. The destructive rainbow collided with the heavenly sword galaxy without making any sound. At this moment, the void between heaven and earth suddenly became silent. Even the sounds of the fierce battle between Yujing Mountain and the great immortal heaven's manifestation sword formation, Xi and Longsheng, the celestial heaven sword, and the yin and yang life and death formation in the distance disappeared. In the silent silence, the dark rainbow cut the heavenly sword galaxy in half. The stars of the sword light collapsed and turned into sword formations. The sword formations then collapsed and turned into rays of sword light. The rays of sword light continued to collapse and turned into rays of sword energy. Then, the rays of sword energy also shattered and turned into rays of sword chi. In the end, all the sword chi dissipated and turned into nothingness, no longer existing. The majestic heavenly sword galaxy was like a long sword with its own physical form, but it was cut in half by another sword that was even sharper. The first half of the broken sword lost its direction and broke through the void, disappearing from the vast thousand worlds. However, in the invisible space of the universe, it turned into a ray of light and swept all the way, destroying countless stars. Sword Venerable Tiangong's eyes dimmed for a moment. At that moment, his face seemed to have aged a lot, and his tall body seemed to have stooped a little. The immortal heaven galaxy fruit in front of him was also destroyed by Lin Feng's sword. Venerable Tiangong's eyes lit up again, and the broken half of the galaxy returned to protect him. It was completely cut into pieces by the dark, destructive rainbow. Some white flowing lights scattered between heaven and earth, as if blood was splashing out from a human wound. It was the damaged essence of the great path of the Great Dipper swordsman. He held the ancient sword Heavenly Dipper in his hand and retreated, leaving a wound on his right hand that was holding the sword. If he hadn't pulled back his sword in time to defend himself, Lin Feng's attack would have severed his right arm. The number 1 sword cultivator of Shushan, the number 1 sword cultivator of Tian Yuan, had been defeated. The thunderous sword venerable and the others heaved a long sigh of relief. For a moment, they felt both gratified and frustrated. In the war between the two worlds more than 4,600 years ago, after the death of the previous sect master of Mount Shu, Sword Venerable Tiangang of Mount Shu became the number 1 sword cultivator in the cultivation world of the divine land of the Great Heaven Primordial World. Apart from the War of the Two Realms, when he was active in the Divine Land, most of the primordial divinity adepts were not even born yet. By the time Honorable Swordsman of the Thunderclap and the others had proven their primordial divinity and stepped onto the stage of history, Honorable Swordsman of the Big Divinity had already retired to Mount Shu to challenge the Dharma-ending tribulation. He had been living in seclusion most of the time. For Honorable Swordsman of the Thunderclap and the others, and even their predecessors, Honorable Swordsman of the Big Divinity was half a historical figure. In his long life, Honorable Swordsman of the Thunderclap and the others had participated in 3 wars between the two worlds. He had participated in the decisive battle between the righteous and the demonic that ended the Middle Era. He had experienced many battles between the Mount Shu sword sect and other sects and forces in the Divine Land. He had personally killed 2 experts at the initial tribulation stage, 7 at the Dao integration stage of the human tribe or the demon tribe, and dozens below the Dao integration stage. However, this number 1 sword cultivator of the Divine Land had been defeated by Lin Feng at this moment. The void in the distance shook violently, and several figures appeared. The 2 people in the lead were the current sect master of the Heavenly Sword Sect, Honorable Swordsman of the Heavenly Sword Sect, and the Venerable Swordsman of the sect. At this moment, they were also shocked by the scene in front of them. They were so excited that they could not even hide themselves anymore. Although the Mount Shu sword sect was supported and hindered by the Taishu Temple, the Heavenly Sword Sect's ruling position among the sword sects was deeply understood by everyone in the Heavenly Sword Sect. At this moment, seeing Honorable Swordsman of Mount Shu defeated by Lin Feng, even Honorable Swordsman of the Heavenly Sword Sect, Honorable Swordsman of the Heavenly Sword Sect, could not control their state of mind. All the sword cultivators in the world had complicated feelings at this moment, and the Mount Shu cultivators felt like the sky was falling and the earth was sinking. Honorable Swordsman of the Lunar Sword Sect, Honorable Swordsman of the Shaozi Sword Sect, and Honorable Swordsman of the Guanchong Sword Sect were all ashen-faced. Honorable Swordsman of the New Sun Sword Sect frowned and looked at Lin Feng and Honorable Swordsman of the Big Divinity Sword Sect in the void for a long time. Lin Feng put his left hand behind his back and held his sword in his right hand. He turned to look at the yin and yang life and death array and said indifferently, "Xi and Longsheng, you have not completely recovered from the degeneration tribulation and cannot endure a long battle. If you continue to fight with my yin and yang life and death array, even if you can escape in the end, I'm afraid you will not be able to control the immortal heaven sword." Lin Feng extended his left hand from behind his back and changed his hand seals. The yin and yang life and death array was suddenly withdrawn, releasing Xi and Longsheng and the immortal heaven sword. Xi and Longsheng's eyes were burning as he stared at Lin Feng. Lin Feng waved his hand, and the yin and yang life and death array was activated again. It turned into a light screen that covered the sky, separating Yujing Mountain and Mount Shu. It replaced Yujing Mountain and clashed with the great immortal heaven sword array. The battle between the 2 top arrays began, and the sky and earth were dark. It was not as easy as before. The yin and yang life and death array brought less pressure to Swordsman Firmament and the great immortal heaven sword array than to Yujing Mountain, but they could not be distracted. On the other hand, Yujing Mountain released the cosmic light of extreme and shrouded honorable swordsman of the great immortal heaven sword array, preventing him from taking another step. Lin Feng looked at Xan Longsheng calmly. I know you want to repeat the battle in West Hill City. Now, I will give you this chance. This time, there will be no disturbance from the Taishu Temple, and there will be no Dharma-ending calamity. You and I will fight again, one man and one sword. Xian Longsheng's eyes burst with a shocking light. Slowly, he said, one sword. Lin Feng nodded. Up to you. Xian Longsheng let out a clear cry, like the cry of a sword in the 9 heavens. He held his sword horizontally in front of his chest, and the index and second fingers of his left hand gently brushed across the surface of the immortal heaven sword. The surface of the white, jade-like sword flickered with a lustrous light. The light was not intense, but it was not weak, and it resonated with the laws of the Great Path. It was like the ruler of the Great Path. Wherever the tip of the sword pointed, the endless spiritual qi of the world gathered and turned into boundless sword qi. The entire world seemed to have become the tip of the immortal heaven sword, and its target was Lin Feng. Holding the immortal heaven sword, Xian Longsheng casually pointed at Lin Feng. The world froze, and the invisible sword intent turned into a tangible edge, sweeping toward Lin Feng. In all directions, there was no place that did not contain the edge of the immortal heaven sword. After the tribulation, Xian Longsheng had comprehended the immortal heaven sword qi and obtained the greater thousand sword realm. Like the Big Dipper sword Venerable's heavenly sword Galaxy and Big Dipper sword Star, it was a sword Tao that belonged solely to a Shu Mountain sword cultivator after the tribulation and the foundation of the immortal heaven sword qi. The Big Dipper sword Venerable's sword moved the galaxy, while Xian Longsheng's sword turned the world into a sharp edge. Wherever the edge pointed, there was nothing it could not destroy. It turned the entire world into its own sword realm, and the enemy trapped in the sword realm would have to bear the killing of the entire world. This sword Tao was extremely compatible with the immortal heaven sword. When the sword aura spread out, it immediately pressed down on Lin Feng with an earth-shattering force, making him feel like he was surrounded by enemies. It was as if his existence was not tolerated by the world and he was unnecessary. Only by quickly disappearing would he be in line with the righteous path of the world. Sword Venerable Tongtian, Elderly Sword Immortal, Sword Venerable of the Thunderous Sword, and the other sword cultivators all unsheathed their swords. They were actually attracted by the immortal heaven sword and seemed to want to attack Lin Feng together. Everything in the divine land that could be called a sword trembled slightly, wanting to fly toward the immortal heaven sword. Lin Feng calmly looked at Xian Longsheng. The black and white light around him suddenly dimmed until it was almost undetectable. He flicked the blade of the sky-crushing sword with a finger, and the mournful blood-red light also dimmed. The blood-red light that had enveloped the world seemed to have disappeared. What had changed was the heaven-punishing sword's blade itself. The originally glistening and translucent blade had now become as red as blood. The blade didn't reflect any dazzling sword light, but it was completely blood-red. A faint light kept rolling on the blade of the sky-crushing sword. It was a black and white light that looked like a small dot or a drop of water that streaked across the blood-red blade. But looking at Lin Feng and the sky-crushing sword in his hand, Xian Longsheng's expression became unprecedentedly serious. The immortal heaven sword in his hand also let out a rare long cry. Sword Venerable Tongtian, Sword Venerable of the Thunderous Sword, Sword Venerable of the Flowing Light Sword, Sword Venerable of the Great Wilderness, and the others, who couldn't lift their heads under the pressure of the immortal heaven sword, felt much more relaxed now. They stared at the immortal heaven sword and the sky-crushing sword in a daze as a predestined battle unfolded. Lin Feng's movements were casual and carefree, as if he didn't care about this battle at all. He gently waved the seemingly ordinary sky-crushing sword in his hand. However, wherever the blood-red blade touched, the immortal heaven sword formed from the spiritual energy of the world would all disintegrate. Lin Feng pointed the tip of his sword at Xian Longsheng and the immortal heaven sword. He stepped into the void and stepped forward. The great thousand-sword realm continued to collapse, as if a world of creation was approaching its end and turning into nothingness. The faint black and white light became more and more dazzling. As the sky-crushing sword flashed, a torrential evil aura burst forth, destroying all living beings and collapsing the void. Xian Longsheng shouted and also stepped forward with the immortal heaven sword in his hand. The tip of his sword was also pointed straight at Lin Feng and the sky-crushing sword. In an instant, countless shadows appeared between heaven and earth. Among the shadows, Lin Feng and Xian Longsheng each held the sky-crushing sword and the immortal heaven sword, and their swords clashed countless times. All kinds of nimble sword moves intertwined, dazzling the onlookers. This was the most agile sword move in the world. But in the end, the shadows dissipated, leaving only Lin Feng and Xian Longsheng walking straight toward each other. The tips of the sky-crushing sword and the immortal heaven sword were pointing at each other. This was a duel between Daos that surpassed sword techniques. Only this duel could truly determine the victor. When the two sides collided, countless spiritual energy and evil aura were destroyed. Endless light spread in all directions from the point where the two peerless divine swords collided, sweeping across the entire Great Thousand World. The spectators could only see the endless flashes of sword light. All the images and sounds were annihilated. All the nascent soul cultivators felt as if their primordial spirits were about to be pierced through. In the distance, Shiyu, Liang Pan, and Zhu Hongwu also felt a faint stabbing pain in their divine senses, as if they were mortals looking directly at the sun. Chapter 880. The violent waves continued to sweep in all directions. All the swords in the divine land were fighting fiercely, and many mortal swords' blades were directly broken. Whether they were right in front of them or far away, cracks also appeared on the swords of the lower-grade magic treasures. The light waves dissipated, and everyone focused their attention on it. Everyone was slightly stunned when they saw it. Sword Venerable Tong Tian, Old Sword Immortal, Thunderous Sword Venerable, and Flowing Light Sword Venerable were even a bit dazed. In the sky, Lin Feng and Xian Longsheng were still facing each other, far away in the void. It was as if their positions had never changed. They were not facing each other, but were still in the same position before the battle. The sky-crushing sword in Lin Feng's hand had returned to its original appearance. It was like a pool of limpid autumn water, flashing with a fierce, clear light, and a blood-red sword light flowing on the blade. Black and white divine light surged from his body, and countless characters and talismans floated in the sky, turning into layers of light. Xian Longsheng also held the immortal heaven sword and stood in the void silently. The spirit energy of heaven and earth gathered toward him, turning into an incomparably huge, invisible sword edge that was everywhere, pointing at Lin Feng. However, even an ordinary mortal could clearly see that blood-red cracks had appeared on the originally flawless immortal heaven sword's blade. The result of the battle just now was that Xian Longsheng's immortal heaven sword was injured by Lin Feng's sky-crushing sword. The Emperor of Swords, the #1 divine sword in the heaven origin world, the ancestor of all swords, the immortal heaven sword, the creation Dharma treasure, was damaged. After the immortal heaven sword was completely perfected and became a creation Dharma treasure, it had been damaged before. It had also been defeated and damaged in battles against powerful enemies. However, in battles against other sword Daos and Dharma treasures, the immortal heaven sword had never tasted defeat and had always been an invincible existence. But today, the immortal heaven sword was defeated. And it was injured by other sword Daos. Sword Venerable Tong Tian and the other sword cultivators stared blankly at Lin Feng and the sky-crushing sword in his hand, unable to recover for a long time. Deep in their hearts, the immortal heaven sword Qi and the altar where the immortal heaven sword stood on were constantly crumbling. After Tiangang's sword Venerable, the #1 swordsman in the divine land, was defeated by Lin Feng and the heaven-punishing sword, the #1 swordsman in the divine land, the immortal heaven sword, was also defeated. At this moment, Xian Longsheng's eyes were gloomy, and his face was a little ruined. He was not depressed, but because he had not fully recovered from the Dharma-ending catastrophe, his magic power inevitably fell into a low after that sword attack. He stared at Lin Feng and said word by word, "I was the one who lost, not the heavenly immortal sword energy or the heavenly immortal sword. Just now, Xian Longxing perfectly displayed his full strength. Even when facing Lin Feng and the heaven-punishing sword, he was able to display his full strength. However, after this attack, he no longer had the strength to activate the immortal heaven sword to its limit. I'm not as good as you, not because the heavenly immortal sword energy is inferior to your heaven-punishing sword energy, and definitely not because the immortal heaven sword lost to your heaven-punishing sword. Xian Longxing took a deep breath, took out the immortal heaven sword, and flew toward Yujing Mountain, which was blocking Tiangang's sword Venerable's way. Lin Feng calmly watched this scene and made Yujing Mountain move out of the way, allowing Xian Longxing to successfully deliver the immortal heaven sword to Tiangang's sword Venerable. Yujing Mountain suddenly moved and landed on top of Lin Feng's head, faintly discernible in the void. Tiangang's sword Venerable held the ancient sword in his left hand, and there were still specks of white light floating on his right arm. He had already refined his body into his origin spirit, and his origin spirit could easily change ordinary injuries, at least not on the outside. At this moment, his injury could not be healed because his foundation was injured by Lin Feng's sword. He needed to rest, and there was no time or energy to care during the battle. But now, Tiangang's sword Venerable used his injured right hand to catch the immortal heaven sword and threw the ancient sword to Xian Longxing. The spirit chi of heaven and earth gathered toward him, and a shocking scene appeared. The injury on Tiangang's sword Venerable's right arm was gradually healing. The blood-red cracks on the immortal heaven sword's blade also disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. With the immortal heaven sword in Tiangang's sword Venerable's hand, the power of both sides gradually resonated, and there was a vague effect of 1 + 1 being greater than 2. Tiangang's sword Venerable, who was in the Dharma-ending realm, activated the immortal heaven sword, and its power was different from when Xian Longxing used it. The entire vast thousand domains seemed to have turned into a sea of starlight, and each star was condensed by an unparalleled sword intent. Lin Feng bent his finger and gently flicked the blade of his heaven-crushing sword. After the battle with the immortal heaven sword just now, the heaven-crushing sword's blade was now shining with a cold light, and there was only a trace of rust left. The terrifying sword intent that could destroy heaven and earth and destroy creation was unprecedentedly powerful. That time, it was caused by the previous sect master of the Shu Mountain Sword sect controlling the immortal heaven sword. At this moment, it was as if the scene from thousands of years ago had reappeared. The sky was filled with flying swords, extremely spectacular. Lin Feng slowly recited, "All the swords in the world come from Shu Mountain, but my sword is beyond the heavens." The sky-crushing sword in his hand shook, and all the sword light converged. The blade became blood-red again, and the black and white divine light condensed to the extreme, turning into a faint light that rolled on the tip of the sky-crushing sword. At this moment, the tip of the sky-crushing sword suddenly turned from blood-red to a chaotic, blurry color. It was so mysterious and unpredictable that it could not be described with words. However, wherever the tip of the heaven-crushing sword reached, the myriad domains were instantly reduced to nothingness. There was actually a faint flicker of light between the heavens and the earth, but after coming into contact with the tip of the heaven-crushing sword, the light completely dimmed and collapsed. Lin Feng waved the sword in his hand and directly split the Tiangang sword Venerable's heavenly sword galaxy with the momentum of splitting the sea. Where the sword tip pointed, Lin Feng controlled the sky-crushing sword and the Tiangang sword Venerable controlled the immortal heaven sword. What made the people of Shu Mountain shiver was that the scales of victory were gradually tipping in favor of Lin Feng and the sky-crushing sword. Even the Tiangang sword Venerable was more and more shocked as the battle went on. Stone Feather, Liang Pan, Zhu Hongguo, and the others who were still watching the battle had slightly serious expressions. Liang Pan shook his head slowly, but his tone was calm and calm. The mystique and dermic powers of the Master of the Celestial Gate are indeed shocking. Xianmen Tianzong is now firmly in the Divine Land, the second most powerful force after Taishu Temple. Even Taishu Temple will have to use all its strength to win. Zhu Hongwu's gaze was fixed on Yujing Mountain. He has the advantage against the Tiangang sword Venerable and the Immortal Heaven sword with the Sky-Crushing sword, but to turn this into victory, he needs his Yujing Mountain to join the battle as well. However, although he can defeat the combination of Tiangang sword Venerable and the Immortal Heaven sword, he may not be able to kill Tiangang sword Venerable or break the Immortal Heaven sword. With his Dao Corroboration Dharma treasure, that bell, and that unfilial son's Permitha bridge, there is hope, Liang Pan said. Shu Mountain will not admit defeat so easily. He cannot suppress the others of Shu Mountain with just the yin-yang life and death formation. As they spoke, the peaks of Shu Mountain shook violently. The violent power made the great Immortal Heaven manifestation sword formation a little unstable, but it also affected the yin-yang life and death formation. Lin Feng lowered his head slightly and saw that below the main peak of Shu Mountain, the 6 peaks of the 6 pulse swords had all uprooted and floated into the sky. The 6 thick pillars of light that enveloped the 6 peaks began to condense. Under the guidance of the pillars of light, the tips of the 6 sword peaks all merged into the huge circular formation that surrounded the main peak of Shu Mountain. During the process, the other 5 sword peaks were fine, but the rocks of Little Shang sword peak kept falling like rain, bombarding the undulating mountains below. The rocks on the periphery of the mountain kept falling, and the belly of the mountain flashed with dazzling light. That seemed to be an endless accumulation of sword light, and now it was finally released and saw the light of day again. The sword light that originally belonged to Little Shang sword peak first completely merged into the Great Immortal Heaven manifestation sword formation. Then, the Great Immortal Heaven manifestation sword formation seemed to have suddenly eaten a huge supplement, and the majestic force caused the yin-yang life and death formation to continuously retreat. The dazzling sword light continued to erupt, as if there was no end. Seeing this, Lin Feng's expression did not change at all. He carefully felt the yin-yang life and death formation, and instead nodded slightly in satisfaction. Chapter 881. The 6 peaks of Shushan's 6 meridians sword armament had been passed down through generations of Shushan swordsmen over the years. Boundless sword will had long been integrated into the peaks, making them truly sword peaks. Throughout Shushan, many sword cultivators, regardless of their level of cultivation, converted the spiritual qi of heaven and earth into their own sword will and spiritual power during their daily training. In this process, they constantly nourished the sword peaks they were on. Now that the 6 sword peaks had been uprooted, the Shushan disciples on the mountains had all been moved. The Little Shang sword peak was the first to shatter, releasing the sword will it had accumulated over the years and pouring it into the Great Immortal Universe sword formation. The mountains shattered and the sword will integrated. After this battle, the Little Shang sword peak would no longer exist. If there were any experts left in Shushan, they would move mountains and seas to rebuild the Little Shang sword peak. Shushan would continue to burn incense, and the sword will would accumulate again. As the battle progressed, the other 5 sword peaks were also ready to supply their accumulated sword will and sword chi to the Great Immortal Universe sword formation at any time. The brilliant light made the world of the sword formed by the Great Immortal Universe sword formation increasingly clear and real. Even the yin and yang life and death formation, under the bombardment of the explosive increase in power, kept retreating. It seemed to be on the verge of losing control of the Great Immortal Universe sword formation. Xiaoyi, let me borrow your Permitha bridge for a while, Lin Feng said with a light smile, his expression relaxed. On Jade Capital Mountain, a magnificent golden bridge descended like a rainbow piercing through the sky, landing in the middle of the yin and yang life and death formation. Lin Feng smiled. Although it's not completely compatible, it's suitable for now. As the Permitha bridge entered the formation, the yin and yang life and death formation's power also skyrocketed, reaching a new level. It steadily suppressed the Great Immortal Universe sword formation below. The brilliant light provided by the Little Shang sword peak was constantly worn down until it was exhausted. Sword Venerable Firmament, who was in charge of the Great Immortal Universe sword formation, was expressionless. With a sword gesture, the Little Shang sword peak that had been integrated into the formation began to disintegrate, turning into a sea of rubble that fell to the ground. It was as if a sword had been unsheathed and a peerless divine sword had been unsheathed from within. Its bright brilliance seeped into the great immortal universe's sword formation of all manifestations. Without flinching, it faced the yin and yang life and death formation above its head head-on. It wanted to break through the suppression of the yin and yang life and death formation and rendezvous with Big Dipper swordsmen. On the other side, the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign held the immortal heaven sword and silently looked at Lin Feng. He didn't waste any words and continued to advance. Lin Feng clasped his left hand behind his back and held the Heaven Destroyer sword in his right hand. Both of them dove into the void and fought like two gods of the universe, causing the heavens to collapse and the earth to crack. Watching the battle, Liang Pan and Zhu Hongwu secretly sighed in pity. Looking at Yujing Mountain, who was floating in the air as if he had nothing to do with it, they shook their heads. With Lin Feng's Yujing Mountain town there, others who wanted to take advantage of it would have to weigh their options and not act rashly. But this way, he will not be able to kill Sword Sovereign Tian Dipper or break the immortal heaven sword. Even if he uses his treasure, he will only be able to defeat the Sword Sovereign and the immortal heaven sword. In order to completely kill him, he will have to fight to the death. Even if the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign fights to the death and is killed, he will have to pay a huge price himself. Liang Pan nodded. His Yujing Mountain is not only defending against us, but also against the interference of the people from Taishu Temple. But in this battle, he is destined to only humiliate Shu Mountain and not achieve a decisive result, unless he has other tricks up his sleeve. Liang Pan frowned slightly. It's still the same question. Why must he come to Shu Mountain to fight? Zhu Hongwu's eyes narrowed. The immortal heaven sword. His target is the immortal heaven sword. When fighting in the void, without the great immortal phenomenon sword formation to distract Lin Feng, the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign and the immortal heaven sword would be in a much more dangerous situation, but there is still a high chance that they can escape. If the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign is willing to sacrifice himself, he can guarantee that the immortal heaven sword will escape. He came to Shu Mountain because he is certain that he can completely trap the immortal heaven sword here. But what is he going to do? In the current situation, even if the immortal heaven sword is defeated, it can still escape. The ruler and minister of the Great Zhou were perplexed, unable to find an answer no matter how they thought about it. And Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, who was currently battling Lin Feng, also had the same doubts in his heart. But for him who was currently at a disadvantage, dealing with Lin Feng's destroying sky-decimating earth attack was the most important matter. This was the most peak sword battle in the Divine Land in the past 10,000 years. His Shu Mountain had lost again and again, and he could not afford to lose this round. Determination flashed in the eyes of the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign. He held the immortal heaven sword in his right hand and fought with Lin Feng. The index and two fingers of his left hand formed a sword and pointed at Lin Feng. A dark and gloomy black gas turned into a perfectly straight black line, shooting towards Lin Feng. The 5 decrements of the heavens, the Dharma ending calamity. Wherever the black aura passed, it was as if the entire world was withering and ushered in the end of the world. It was an irreversible and final destruction. Seeing this, Lin Feng chuckled. Rays of 7-colored light flashed on his void-returned Dharma body and circled around his body. The black aura of the Dharma ending calamity directly pierced through Lin Feng's body, but it did not cause any harm to him. It was as if Lin Feng was just an illusion. The Dharma ending calamity released by the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign fell on thin air just like that. All the spectators widened their eyes. Even the spiritual senses of the distant white cloud mountain trembled slightly. Before the opponent's Dharma ending calamity was triggered and locked onto him, there was still a chance for him to avoid it. However, once the Dharma ending calamity was triggered, it was not something that the opponent could avoid by hiding in the void. This would trigger the Deva's 5 decrepit phenomena in the opponent's body and produce a world-destroying power. At the same time, the caster would also have to bear the same Dharma ending calamity. But now the result was that the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign had to bear the Dharma-ending calamity for nothing, while Lin Feng was unscathed. The Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign stared fixedly at Lin Feng. Lin Feng's figure was faintly discernible in the void. He could clearly see him, but he had completely disappeared from his senses, as if that figure did not exist at all. 2 years ago, in the Battle of the Yingxi, Lin Feng had used Yujing Mountain to avoid the Dharma-ending calamity of Golden Cicada, which had already shocked the world. Now, the Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign saw that Lin Feng was not on Yujing Mountain, so he gave it a try. Who would have thought that Lin Feng himself could also avoid the Dharma-ending calamity? Lin Feng's expression was calm. The colorful halos around him disappeared, and he appeared in the void again. This was the mysterious heavenly escape. Lin Feng had comprehended the power of the mysterious heaven treasure tree on the top of Yujing Mountain. It was an exquisite escape magic power that exhausted the mystery of time and space, and also integrated many kinds of great ways of heaven and earth into it. If it was only the change of time and space, it would not be able to avoid the Dharma-ending calamity. When he was in the primordial spirit incarnation realm, he indeed had to rely on the power of the mysterious heaven treasure tree to use it. The sword momentum of the great immortal universe sword formation surged, and it was locked in a stalemate with the yin and yang life and death formation suppressed by the Permitha Golden Bridge. The Celestial Dipper Sword Sovereign's sword fell, and the yin and yang life and death formation, which was under attack from both sides, gave way under Lin Feng's control, allowing Sword Sovereign Firmament and the immortal heaven sword formation to return to Shu Mountain. Sword Sovereign Firmament immediately transferred the control of the Great Immortal Universe Sword Formation to Sword Sovereign Firmament. Sword Sovereign Firmament guided the Immortal Heaven Sword Formation in his hand, and the aura of the entire Great Immortal Universe Sword Formation suddenly changed. Boundless sword light shot into the sky, and the world of swords suddenly expanded, as if it wanted to control the entire world. The vast thousand worlds and the divine lands suddenly seemed to become a world of swords. With the Immortal Heaven Sword's control, the Great Immortal Universe Sword Formation finally pushed its power to the extreme. Originally, there were only pieces of sword peaks, but now, the Savage Leaving Sword Peak and the Shaoyang Sword Peak shattered together. 2 bright rays of light simultaneously entered the Great Immortal Universe Sword Formation. The power of the sword formation suddenly surged, and with the support of the sword formation, the power of the Immortal Heaven Sword also increased. Sword Sovereign Firmament swung the Immortal Heaven Sword in his hand, and the entire world turned into invisible sword edges that fell like rain, stabbing toward Lin Feng. An unprecedented violent power erupted since the start of the battle. This power had slaughtered 480 million blood god scions of the Blood River tribe in the past, and killed the primordial Taotai with a single sword. It hadn't appeared even during the war between the two worlds 4,000 years ago. The last time it had appeared was 10,000 years ago. Now, it had finally reappeared in the world. Seeing this, Lin Feng nodded slightly. Not bad, it's indeed extraordinary. But this time, you won't be able to escape. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.